the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, hello, and welcome to HBR Talk 252, What Journalism Looks Like. Ari Blaff's, I hope I'm saying his name right, Ari Blaff's refreshingly open mind. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and we're following up on last week's episode when we discussed an Institute for Family Studies article that read like any feminist hit piece on the men's rights movement. This week we're looking at a follow-up article by the same writer, Ari Blaff, published in the National Review after he talked to MRAs and learned more about the movement. But first we gotta do what we gotta do, which I think we didn't do last week. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as recent and long-past experiences have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly, instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. Now, with all that out of the way, let's take a look at this article and see what happens when an actual journalist meets people who confront his pre-existing notions about them. I'll be honest, I looked through this a little bit. I was actually pretty happy with this.
Cool.
So this is going to be an interesting read. So the title is The Unseen Faces of the Men's Rights Movement. And I have to say I like that simply because when we read articles about the men's rights movement, like, I swear 99 times out of 100, you can tell that the person who wrote the article read a bunch of other articles about the men's rights movement and then based what they were writing strictly on what those articles said about us, and never met any of us, never talked to any of us, never looked into like any video of us doing things. Nothing. Didn't come to our blogs, our news sites, our social media, nothing. So
that would be a little too much like journalism, Hannah. They don't do that.
Well, and see, journalism is what happened here. So, and now it started with the men's rights movement contacting him, but most of the journalists that we have contacted and said, hey, do you want to actually know more about us, really didn't want to know anything more about us. They were more interested in writing than in actually disseminating information. And like we experienced that with, like GQ magazine. We've experienced that with Vice. We've experienced that with just a host of mainstream media. And so this, I just pointing out in this, if someone holds a bunch of misconceptions about a group of people, the misconceptions that get corrected are the ones that are going to get written about, right? Yeah. So not everything in this article is going to be perfect, but it is definitely way better than the previous one. So let's see.
Well, that bar is pretty low. So
yeah, that's true. I will say that. I will give you that. And it starts out basically explaining some things about the people involved that like really contradict one of the main things that is said about us. We get called homophobic all the time for some stupid reason. Mm-hmm. And his first sentence: Peter is a gay British writer who supports the Labour Party and grew up in a stable middle-class household, and he's an active member of the men's rights movement.
Yay, Peter.
Well, I'm since he didn't give last names, I don't know if I can be sure it's the Peter I'm thinking of, but we know Peter. Now in his late 20s, Peter began sympathizing with the movement as an adolescent after experiencing what he sees as the education system's disparate treatment of boys and girls. In school, I saw a lot of double standards, in that the ways men and boys are treated socially. I've read that paragraph 4 or 5 times and had that in there. In any case, Peter told the National Review he found that boys were often disciplined unfairly, while administrators and teachers turned a blind eye to the behavior of girls. Yeah. In fact, now this is UK. What he's talking about happens in the UK. Something that's going on in the United States that has been going on for, since at least the late 80s, when they started ushering in, not No Child Left Behind, but, I can't think of what they're called. Zero tolerance policies. When they started ushering in zero tolerance policies in regard to things like drug use and stuff like that, they didn't really do anything yet with violence and allegations of misogyny and harassment and stuff like that in schools till much later. But the whole zero tolerance thing in the United States led to a sort of, it's called the school to prison pipeline. And the tendency is, if a student engages in a behavior that is likely to get that student in trouble, a breaking of the rules, a behavior that causes conflict in the classroom or on school grounds without actually breaking the rules but still causes problems, right? When you have that stuff going on, it used to be like the teachers or the principal, the vice principal, that area of administration would individualize their handling of that behavior to tailor their discipline to meet the student's learning needs in terms of behavioral modification. So if there was a student who got caught using an illicit substance, and the best way to reach that student was to move the student to a different classroom and take steps to remove associations between that student and a provider of that substance, for instance. They would take that step and they might not necessarily do like suspension or after school punishment and stuff like that. But they didn't do that. Starting in the 90s and stuff, it was like, well, you're expelled. That's zero tolerance, you're expelled. Right? And, similarly, if they had a student that was just being a complete and utter asshole, and because that student's getting into, fights all the time because they're an asshole, you might have a teacher that comes along and says, hey, I notice this is happening a lot. What's going on? And maybe the student doesn't understand some social thing that the teacher can help them understand. Whereas now, you got a student that gets into fights all the time. That student, they call the cops on that student. Busted, you're going to JDC now, where you'll get into fights all the time until somebody decides to adopt you into their gang, and then now you're going to learn to be a lifelong criminal.
Right.
Like, it's exactly the opposite of what should be done.
Right. Social ostracization, am I saying that right? Ostracization is the lesson that they're being taught.
Mm-hmm.
You're bad. Get out. Go away. Go be somewhere else. It's not anything like you were saying about how to, explain to these people what they're doing wrong, why you were wrong in this situation, why maybe you need to control your temper in certain situations, why it's not right to act out when other people are in a learning environment and trying to do just that. How being a disruption is just not, there's a time and place for that, if there ever is, I guess. Yeah, of course there is, but it's not when you're in class.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, boys are more often seen as disruptors, and girls are more often seen as victims. So if a boy misbehaves, he gets treated as a disruptor. Whereas if a girl misbehaves, they're more likely to look into it a little bit, try to see her as a victim. If she blames a boy for her misbehavior, they don't even always ask questions. They just go after the boy. And what ends up happening, they're more likely to call the cops on boys. And, even there is a racial element to this. Like, black boys are treated worse than white boys, and black girls are treated worse than white girls in zero tolerance. But boys, in general, are treated worse than all categories of girls. Yeah. And, when you add disability in there, it makes it worse. So if you have a boy in school who is black and has a learning disability, he's the most likely to be wrongly sent to juvenile detention. And, we have that issue that is a horrible issue in the United States public education system. And then from there, we have an issue of sexual exploitation of boys in juvenile detention by female staff. Like, female staff perpetrates something like 95% of that sexual exploitation, despite being less than half of the staff at these institutions. And it's not necessarily all guards. Like, female staff can be the librarian, female staff can work in the kitchen, female staff can work in the laundry, female staff can be the therapist, female staff can be janitorial, female staff can be administrative. They can be anyone that interacts with the inmates can be guilty of this. And it's the worst would be if it's female staff who happens to be the therapist that the inmate has to work with in order to try to rehabilitate himself because he's just been hit with something that is going to make things worse. Being sexually exploited is going to cause him to experience more behavioral problems. It's going to cause him to experience trauma, and it's actually going to guarantee just about that the trajectory of his life is not going to be as functional, as healthy for him, as happy, none of that. Like, he's just been sabotaged profoundly. And so if you take that situation and you apply that back, to that school to prison pipeline, that zero tolerance, it's essentially zero tolerance for boys. So what they're talking about, what he mentioned in Europe there in the UK, that's everywhere. But the United States is doing it on steroids. Like, we're in serious trouble with the way that we treat our boys.
Yeah.
But we'll go on because there's more that he's written about. Like many of his fellows in the movement, Peter saw his own experiences in school as an outgrowth of a wider societal ill. Academics, feminist organizations, and politicians often diagnose masculinity itself as a problem in need of a solution, which is a great way of describing that that behavior, because that's exactly what they do. In 2019, the American Psychological Association issued guidelines arguing that traditional masculinity is, on the whole, harmful. The
APA.
Yeah. Let's reread that. In 2019.
2019.
Yeah. So current year plus 4.
Yep.
The American Psychological Association issued guidelines arguing that traditional masculinity is, on the whole, harmful.
On the whole.
Yeah. But that's not sexist or anything.
No.
Traditional masculinity pretty much refers to the way men and masculinity have been viewed in terms of, what constitutes an adult man versus what constitutes a man who hasn't grown up yet, a young man, a boy, an adolescent, a man who's childish or whatever, like throughout history. So we just take the entire history of humanity and say, well, the male half was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Forever.
We fucked up. Let's just bin these guys. We'll make some new males and show them how to do it right, ladies. Right?
Yeah. Yep. There we go. Because women have accomplished so much in advancing civilization and bringing about changes in our level of technology and the types of scientific advancements we have that have made life easier for people. Wait, no, that's mostly men.
Yeah, those filthy reprobates. they're just those basket of deplorables. They're completely irredeemable from society. So let's just yeet them all right into the fucking sun. And this is, and this is what they're doing. This is, if nobody can see it, and I'm sure everyone who's listening to this knows, this is a war on men. Okay. Yeah. The APA is someone that the government goes to, right, to get their seal of approval, to stamp their seal of approval on guidelines that they use in schools, right? This is what they're doing, and this is the messaging that they're saying. Traditional masculine. I don't even know why they put traditional in there. They might as well have just said masculinity, because on the whole,
that's what they meant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep, that's basically what they meant. And we hear this all the time.
Yeah, and it really bothers me because, I watch a lot of videos and, about the manosphere. I hate that term for it. But anyway, and you see some women that comment and they're like, well, I don't understand why men have a problem with these women that say these things. Just don't deal with them. But that's so far beyond the point. Because it's the constant messaging. It's the constant attacks. Men need to stand up and say, this is wrong. You don't just get to call us just a bunch of disgusting, worthless, shit bags, and what are they're not going to stand up and defend themselves?
Yeah. Well, you think about it this way. Like, how many of the people who tell us and tell the greater men's rights movement that men should just tolerate misandric statements about men and masculinity and stuff like, well, just don't deal with those people. How many of those people who say that would stay silent in a conversation with other people where one of them just started dropping racial slurs into the conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
How many of them would not say, hey, the history of using those terms is that they were used to tear down, break down, and subjugate entire demographics of people, right? And that is what the term toxic masculinity is designed to do. It is designed to tear down, break down, and subjugate. And it is designed to turn people against the idea of masculinity, to give misandrists a tool to blame men for problems that are inflicted on men by the social standards that men face that are unfair.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is one of those, you just have to turn it around on them. Like, what other kinds of prejudice do you think we should tolerate? Right. Like, as soon as you start asking that kind of tough question, that kind of rhetoric goes away. Or the person blocks you and flounces and bounces and starts telling all their friends what an evil person you are, and then you end up in a conversation with 47 people trying to defend the idea that wanders through 16 topics of feminist ideology. Like, we haven't done that before.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he writes on, the following year, researchers popularized the term manosphere, casting anyone associated with the men's rights movement as traffickers in misogyny. And what's interesting about that is, like, the men's rights movement, I think the men's rights movement was using the word manosphere. I remember us using the word manosphere to describe the greater discussion around men's issues that didn't just all hover on men's rights. So we have men talking about going their own way, men going their own way, talking about, ways to minimize your experience of being exploited by the current status quo. You have pickup artists talking about ways to get dates, ways to connect with women, ways to get laid, depending on which pickup artist groups you're talking about. You have incels talking about the suffering that they're going through, ways to improve themselves, what issues they have to face in life because of their circumstances and everything. You have fathers' rights groups that just focus on fathers' issues and not necessarily on the greater, this is going on with gay men, this is going on with men going their own way, this is going on with pickup artists. We just want to be able to see our kids and not get reamed financially by the government for being abandoned by our ex-wives. And then, of course, you also have, like, gay men's groups may not have anything to do with fathers' rights. Like, there is some overlap, because there are men who were closeted and married, and then after their divorce came out, and there's a whole other issue of fathers' rights there, because at least during the 20th century, a man being gay was something that his ex-wife could use against him in custody court.
Yeah.
We don't want him to infect the children with gay. Right. And so, like, this is,
he's gonna get some gay on the kid. Oh my God. What do you do? Wash it off in the shower? Oh my God.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there are some very serious changes that have taken place in social attitudes, where we recognize, like, you have kids, you're a father, or obviously if you're a mother, you have kids, you're a mother, but we don't just throw that out because the relationship with the other parent broke up. And, we don't just throw that out because you might have been closeted when you became a parent, or your parenthood was in agreement with a person that you weren't in a relationship with, and now that person's wanting to renege on the agreement and not let you see the child. Being gay does not make you a bad parent, and it doesn't preclude you from being a parent.
And holy shit, how many, I don't know if you've heard, but I've heard so many stories about, these women who become single mothers, and because of the rejection of that relationship, they then turn into lesbians.
Yep. And just like, I actually sat in on a conversation with a woman that was in that situation. Like, her ex was doing what women usually do, and trying everything to monopolize the kids. And that was one of the things that he brought up in court. And she's like, yes, I'm going to infect my son with lesbianism. That's just going to be, an absolute... So I gave her something to laugh about. I told the story about how my husband got designated in an Eastern Ohio court. My husband is officially designated as a lesbian. He has his lesbian card. We were accused of being in a 4-way lesbian relationship, and that included him. He was the 4th lesbian in the 4-way lesbian relationship that the ex in that case had imagined was the real reason for the divorce, because that guy was a dick. Like, honestly, he wasn't even... That was the interesting thing about it was he didn't have the power to do like what the 7 Years in Hell ex did, where she made a bunch of false allegations and the court took them seriously. But if he'd had that kind of power, we'd have had to answer for some bizarre shit, like stuff that I don't know if it was humanly possible. But yeah, my husband officially, according to the courts in Ohio, is a lesbian. Just so you know, I'm in a lesbian relationship. There you go. That's it. It's a good thing I'm bi. That's all I can say. Because when
Damn,
you got
the whole package.
When he didn't get a sex change, but he did get a sexuality change. But we can handle that. Like, I hate the court system. But yeah, so we have this broad spectrum of things that are discussed in conjunction with masculinity and manhood. Women are involved, and so on. And it's kind of, it's not bad to call us the manosphere, just because there is a lot to put under that umbrella, and we have to have a label for it somehow. So and Albert Nader Retro gives us $2.20 Canadian and says, has your husband come out to his parents yet? Oh yeah. Oh, we had the best laugh about that, him getting designated as a lesbian. That was fun. We told them all about the case. It was a dumb, like the dumbest divorce I have ever seen. Like it was, the marriage was needed to end. It was a very bad situation. It's what happens when a mother doesn't value teaching her kids accountability, and that kid gets together with someone who won't stand up for themselves and has never learned to stand up for themselves. And most of the time when that happens, you end up with serious injuries as a result. And fortunately, in this case, because the abuse victim had people in her life that were like, get the fuck out of that situation. What the hell is wrong with you? And not, oh, you poor thing, that must be so hard. Like, no, just don't stay. Get out. And and eventually she did. That ended that. So, and it didn't end in the kind of one-sided thing that you usually see either. So it was a pretty good result in the case. But good grief, it takes somebody being an absolute moron nincompoop to actually do what feminists say this is what domestic violence looks like. When it really does look like that, the perpetrator is a complete and utter moron. That's all I can say about that. That's so out of the norm. And the person who does that is so out of the norm. But and that's why my husband is a lesbian. He's the hairiest lesbian I've ever met too. Just saying.
I don't know. There's some tough competition out there.
Yeah. The experience inspired Peter to approach equality groups and try to raise these issues. Oh, gosh, yeah. And that works well when you're a dude. I was, of course, screamed at, called names, lied to, and banned. he said.
Yeah, just another day in the life of a misogynist.
Struggling to find a place to hold conversations about masculinity, Peter started an online forum, Men's Human Rights, where he began to discuss topics that are often ignored, crudely stereotyped, or just straight up demonized by the mainstream media. Peter invited National Review to observe the channel and speak with nearly a dozen participants, most of whom agreed to speak on the condition of anonymity and are referred to using fictitious first names. I created the Discord because there was a massive need for men to get support that wasn't being met, and for people in the men's rights activist subreddit to talk and organize in real time. This is something else, like, for the whole time pretty much, because I can remember when the men's rights subreddit was like just about 3,000 guys, 3,000 people total. Like, it's over 300,000 now. But I can remember when it was just around 3,000 people, and feminists in the feminist subreddits, plural, went ballistic after they discovered that there was a men's rights subreddit and tried to get it banned. And they did everything. Like, they were like the inspector to the men's rights subreddit's Pink Panther. Every couple of days there was some other thing they were trying. They petitioned the admins. They came in and tried to start fights and use those to petition the admins. They made fake posts. Like, they're part of the reason that now when you do a post on Reddit, when you post something on Reddit, you can edit your post within the first minute. But after the first minute, if you edit it, then you get an asterisk so everybody knows it was edited. And prior to this happening, that was not the case. They would come in, they would make a post that sounded like a man had had a great victory against a particularly odious woman's behavior in, like, court or something along those lines. And people would congratulate him on his handling of the situation. The situation that described might be something that would make people angry. So people might express, oh, you really show that, bitch. And then they would come back and edit it and make it look like it was a post about a guy beating his wife for something perfectly normal. And then they would send that to see what these guys are actually talking about in the subreddit. They're congratulating this guy for beating his wife. So somebody had to create a bot to archive the original post every time somebody would post something in the men's rights subreddit. And then they could go back and say, well, we have a bot that archives this, and what they wrote before they got all those comments was this, and then after they got all those comments, they did this. And so the men's rights subreddit survived. There was a very short time when I was without internet for several months, and I came back to Reddit to be unable to find the men's rights subreddit, and there was this huge debate over whether or not it should exist. And I weighed in on that debate with a few statements about, women have, and I gave a list of the feminist subreddits available at the time, plus non-feminist women's subreddits to discuss women's issues. And men have, and I linked to a video of crickets chirping. And, it was just like, all right, so if you say it's evil for men to have even one place to discuss that is controlled by men, that's controlled by the people who are having the discussion and not some outside group that's going to censor them like little kids, then you're sexist. It is absolute discrimination to not allow men to have an equal opportunity to create their own subreddit. And if you want to discuss stuff, feminist, like male feminist issues from a male feminist perspective, it's not like you can't create subreddits for that too. Just don't shut this one down. And there were a bunch of other people who were saying the same things. There were more people talking about it, I think, than there had been in the subreddit at the time. And the conversation ultimately resulted in, okay, the men's rights subreddit can exist. And the guys that run the subreddit, the administrators for that subreddit, the mods, have had to really walk a fine line with the admins, and they've had to work very hard to keep the subreddit from getting banned, because it seems like, every couple days there's a new threat. We're going to ban you guys. We're going to ban you guys. And that's been going on since, 2006, 2007, like whenever Reddit started almost. Really, it might have been before I was even on Reddit. And that's essentially, why there needs to be a forum where people who use the men's rights subreddit can maintain contact with each other and organize and discuss things outside of that subreddit, because it may cease to exist at any time. Like, it's been under threat. It's lived under the axe for its entire existence. And I don't think the feminist subreddits can say that they've ever been under the axe. They are the axe. So, let's see. We'll go on. He says, I created the Discord because there was a massive need for men to get support that wasn't being met for people on the men's rights activist subreddit to talk and organize in real time. We have had several men come to us on the verge of suicide, most of them disillusioned with the regular channels. Peter explained. Peter and the members of his channel aren't under the impression that women and girls don't face unique challenges. They just believe men and boys have particular struggles that modern feminists are unwilling to acknowledge. And that's a good way to describe it. Like, if you go to the men's rights subreddit, you will find a range of opinions from, like my opinion, feminism has always been the wrong way to handle gender issues. And it's always been misandric, and the issues are not really the way feminists have described them, and they never have been. To people who believe that it's only modern feminism that's bad, and the first wave wasn't so bad, and now, there are things that we can acknowledge, like there didn't always exist in the United States a law that said that you couldn't make a person's immutable characteristic demographic a reason to pay them less than some other group of people. So, for instance, if you got a job at a factory and you were not white, you might get a lower paycheck. People have forgotten about that one. And if you were not male, you might get a lower paycheck. The law did allow that. It wasn't forbidden. Now, if the job market was such that employers were competing for workers instead of workers competing for jobs, then you would have a situation where they'd have to offer compensation to get people to work. And that would get rid of some of those prejudices just on the fact of you can't afford to be turning down people because they won't take lower pay. Right? But that's not what happened. What happened was there was a fight for pay equality, where if you're getting an hourly rate for a specific job, that hourly rate is the same no matter who takes that job. And the labor movement fought for that. And initially, they were not even fighting for gender to be included in that, for sex to be included in that. That was included with intent to kill the bill. And it didn't, because the politicians at the time did not want to piss off female voters.
Yeah.
So that's our history. And it isn't something that, feminists will take credit for that. Feminists take credit for that all the time. That wasn't feminists, that was unions. Unions did that.
Yep.
And yes, some people involved in unions were feminist. But it's like saying that because you were on the bus, you are responsible for driving it where it went. Nope.
Right.
You weren't. You weren't responsible. You didn't turn the steering wheel. You didn't put your foot on the gas. You didn't pay for the gas. You were along for the ride.
Right. And you damn sure ain't Rosa Parks, so.
No. No, definitely not. So there you go. I think every men's rights activist has a moment like this, and it's why so many of us don't like feminists, Peter said. We were told they support equality. And we have been told and told and told and told. we were told they support equality. Then we get screamed at and told we're gaslighting people because we say anti-male hate is real. Meanwhile, men's rights activists happily acknowledge the existence of both male and female victims and treat them as equally valid.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already gotten, like, in these, we're looking at the first half of the story, right? Just in the first half of the story, we've already gotten quite a bit of acknowledgement that men's rights activists are not the people he was thinking that we were. Right?
Yeah.
He's not describing them as misogynistic. He's talking to a men's rights activist. He's learning about our communication channels. It sounds like he visited the men's human rights Discord, which I need to spend more time in there. I don't spend a whole lot of time on Discord, and I should. But in any case, like this is something. If we had someone from GQ that we were dealing with, like, I can guarantee you, for instance, Jeff Charlotte would not have done anything like this. Like, he came to ICMI 2014. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was that long ago. ICMI 2014. Looking for bad things to write about us. He came to ICMI 2014 specifically for hit piece fuel. And he met MRAs and he talked to us, and he had to notice that we were not the people that he was planning to write about. And then he went back to GQ and he wrote a hit piece. Right?
Yeah. Well,
and so that's it. That's what modern media is for the most part. So to see this is very, very heartening. Like the opposite of disheartening, right? I'm stoked.
And to be honest, from my view, from what I'm seeing, it really just seems like he's stating facts. You don't really get any impression of what he's thinking when he's saying this. At least I don't pick that up. I think he's just saying what the facts are. Now, it would be really interesting to know, like, if he had any, like, Cassie J moments while he was writing this and researching this.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see an editorial from him.
Yeah.
Like, this is definitely flat out news reporting, and this is something else. Like, when I worked in newspaper, you had, the way you write a story is you go to the event, or you go to the location, or whatever it is you're covering, right? You get the who, and obviously there's a limit to how much who he can report here, because there is some aspects of anonymity that people want to maintain, right? So you get the who, you get the what, you get the where, all right? You don't necessarily always pronounce, you get the when. You don't necessarily always know why and how. If you know why and how, if they're given to you, if they're shown to you, you can write that as well, right? My journalism teacher in high school used to call them the 5 W's and an H: who, what, where, when, why, and how.
Yep.
And why is usually the one that people get wrong. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're told why, but not always. And so what we would do, like, you don't necessarily, like, there's no judge, there's no J in there, right? There's no what you think of the situation. There's no opinion in there. That's journalism. This person did, or these people did this thing at this location at this time. Here's how they did it. This is the method. And they said X when we asked why, or it solved problem X, like those kind of things. And you don't necessarily have a lot of editorialism in that. So if you're writing a news article, that's how you report it. We see a lot of news articles that have a lot of editorializing in them. Like, this is an editorial show. This is an opinion show. We talk about the news, but we are, when we talk about it, editorializing. Mm-hmm. And that's, like, we're news commentators. That's what news commentators do. And journalists, when they are writing the news, are not supposed to also be news commentators. Like, you can be a news commentator in another article, but this is what journalism looks like. This is the interview. This is what the discussion looked like, and we aren't seeing this characterization that you usually see, the demonization that you usually see. He's not going either direction. These poor angels have been maligned, or, these bad people think that they're doing these things, but really, like, none of that. And I wish there was more of that in the world.
Yeah. I find it laughable when you hear people like the Brian Stelters of the world. Brian Stelter call himself a journalist. What a lot of people don't know is that anybody who's quote unquote on the news, they all have SAG-AFTRA cards. They're all they're literally actors. They're paid actors. So stop it with this. I'm a journalist. You're not. You are reading a script that was given to you by the person who signed your check. That's not journalism.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. And it is like you have to be part of the guild, So that's, and if you ever like, I didn't get to see the whole thing, but I saw parts of Anchorman, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the way it is. Either you can be a hard-hitting reporter and not get the anchor job because you don't look good.
Yep.
Or there's a whole lot of other reasons. You might not deserve it. You might get resentful and so on. But the anchor isn't necessarily the person that does the reporting. They're reading off of a teleprompter. A lot of the stuff that they say is so completely scripted, and they're not allowed to deviate from the script, that they don't look natural when they do deviate from the script. But, Albert Nader Retro gives us $2.20 and says, my YouTube videos are better researched. Well, that's true in terms of like the original story, and in terms of what most journalists, or most people that call themselves journalists, do in comparison to what we're seeing in this story, like where you actually had, he actually went and talked to men's rights activists. It's just a black and white difference there. Senior Six wants to know what a journalist is. A journalist is somebody who gathers information and shares it with the public, and they're looking for useful information for the public. It's to be honestly shared with the public, not to shape the way the public thinks, but to give the public a tool that individuals can use to inform their choices.
Right.
So
now imagine if we gave Matt Walsh a sequel and asked him that had him ask that question.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting. Now, I don't know, man. I don't know very many people would actually understand what a journalist is.
Yeah.
I see we have a doc in the chat.
Surely
let me pull up a chair.
Hi. I mean, surely a journalist is someone who, to some degree, goes into the real world, finds out through their own means what's going on in the real world, and reports it through no other filters.
Exactly.
Regarding what's actually going on. And yeah, this is not in any way what happens on the likes of CNN.
No, of course.
Or in MSNBC, or even Fox News, to be honest. All you're seeing is talking heads telling us what apparently they were told by other people, but they never give their sources.
No.
And ironically, the likes of Twitter are where you get the closest thing you can to journalism. And I say that throwing up in my mouth slightly, but it does require this sort of on the scene, on the spot sort of reporting. Like, it has to be someone who's actually there, who can preferably give their sources. Otherwise, like you say, it's not journalism, it's acting.
Yeah.
So I might as well call myself a journalist, even though all I do is act. I respond to bullshit I see on the internet, and I give other bullshit on the internet. It's like the age of journalism is practically dead at this point, even though you think this would be the age where it lives the most, now that we have the internet, now that we have the ability for citizen journalists, which are really the only kind of journalists anymore, to actually do journalism, but it's just got even more muddied than it ever was back in the day. Oh, was it ever a thing? Now that I'm describing it that way, like as though back in the days of Walter Cronkite, it was actually, journalism was a real thing.
No, Walter Cronkite was extraordinarily biased.
You're not hearkening back to those days of all of the white people journalists.
Even if you go back to the 20s, and even if you go back to even if you go back to early newspapers, where because there was a time where newspapers were not a thing, there's always been that tendency, that human tendency, to filter storytelling and reporting of information through one's own biases. It is hard work to hold those filters back when you're reporting on something. And I mean, it depends on what it is. Like, if there's a fire at 123 Main Street and the only information you know is that the fire was called into the fire department at X o'clock, and the fire department showed up at Y o'clock, and it took this long to put out the fire, and there were this many trucks, then reporting that, it's harder to filter that through your own biases, because there's not a lot to be biased about. But if there's 17 fires in that neighborhood, you can start to impose your own biases when you think about, well, who lives in that neighborhood? Is it a wealthy neighborhood? Is it a poor neighborhood? Are there gangs there? Are there gangs in a nearby neighborhood that hate those gangs? And things like that. You start to make suppositions, and it could just be that all the houses in that neighborhood are really old and the wiring is bad, and you just didn't know, or a bunch of other things could be happening, like a neighborhood where the population is aging and a bunch of the fires are accidental kitchen fires. There's all kinds of causes, but it's not the reporter's job to speculate. It's the reporter's job to say what's known and true, and then other people can speculate.
Right.
And this is what we are seeing here. This is just disseminating the information. Let me see. I scrolled back up, so I got to go back here. And I remember what we were looking at before. Compare this to the original article, in which you can see on the screen, for most in North America, the word men's rights advocate, MRA, is synonymous with sexism and hatred. Members are seen as resentful guys projecting their poisonous hatred at a changing world that's left them behind. The judgment is not entirely misplaced. We've gone from that to reporting what Peter said and the information that he shared, right? Reporting his description of the issues, of his experiences, and of what the movement is about, and what he has experienced within the movement as an MRA. Right. So now we go.
I think what I could say about his attitude in this article so far is that he's just not negative about it. Right. I haven't seen any positive glowing things. Like I said before, he's just reporting this.
Yeah, he's doing what the original article should have been.
Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know if you've read through the whole article. I haven't, but I don't know if some flavor comes out into what he's actually thinking, and that's what I'm looking for.
It does really feel like there's a big old but coming at some point.
It always does. It always does, and you'll find it. You'll find it in the next few paragraphs, but it actually comes from. I'm not going to spoil it because we're going to see
Let's
it.
Go. Yeah.
All right. Not all men's rights activists, a broad label used to describe members of an amorphous movement, are as thoughtful as Peter. There are noxious online chat rooms that are genuinely harmful. In August 2021, Reddit banned the forum Men Going Their Own Way, which boasted white nationalist users. Now, I didn't get involved in that subreddit, but I can sincerely doubt that was what really happened. So we don't have I don't know, I'll have to... Blue Orange, I think, is in the chat, so if he knows anything about that, he'll have to tell us. incels, involuntary celibates, another offshoot of the so-called manosphere, have been responsible for terrorist attacks in America and Canada. And that's another one, like, this is where he's maintaining some misconceptions. And I'll bet the terrorist attack that he's talking about is the one that has been debunked as an incel. I can't think of the guy's name. No, in Canada. No. The Canadian...
I know the one you're thinking of. Alexander...
Manassian.
Manassian.
Like, that guy turned out to not actually be an incel. And so, like, the police have said that he faked being an incel and for attention or some shit. The supposed connection between solutions-oriented men's rights activists and the violent lunatics who commit mass shootings is non-existent, Peter said. Incels don't have any real crossover with men's rights activists. Okay, so that's also an incorrect statement. There are incels in the men's rights movement, but incels are not what the media paints them to be either. And honestly, I think in order to understand that, I think Mr. Blaff would have to speak to the Incel Project.
If I could just go back to this this sentence, which Reddit banned the forum in MGTOW, which boasted of white nationalist users. They said users in plural, but you click the link and it's one guy that I've never heard of. I don't know who the hell this guy is. I mean,
Let's
why
see,
is
who
that?
are we talking about here?
Some dude, Christopher Hassan, a U.S. Coast Guard lieutenant and self-identified white nationalist who was sentenced to 13 years in prison for stockpiling unregistered gun silencers, stockpiling weapons as an addict of a controlled substance, and possession of... Okay, whatever. So
basically, the guy didn't. He didn't actually do anything.
No.
He just had wrong
hurt
think.
Anyone. He didn't hurt anyone. He didn't physically accost anyone.
Well, I completely dismiss drug use. I'm honestly like, if people...
Yeah.
So here's the way I think about drug use. All right. I consider a large number of illicit substances to be poisonous. Right? That's my opinion, and it should stop with me. I mean,
they're all technically poisonous.
Yeah, they're all technically. Yeah. So is sugar and caffeine, and white flour, like the refined white flour that makes up like 3/4 of the food you eat has it as an ingredient, like that. But we don't outlaw those things.
Right.
Right. So if people choose to poison themselves, that is their choice. Like, why does my body, my choice end with abortion advocacy? When, especially given that that's not one body, whereas you're poisoning yourself. Okay, yeah, that's your choice. I don't necessarily always agree with that choice. All right, but I don't have the right to tell somebody else you can't do that. If they didn't ask for my advice, or if I'm not giving advice, then that's it. That's it. No more discussion about it.
Right.
So when I hear that the only laws that someone broke are drug laws, I don't think of that person as a danger, a threat, a criminal, a ne'er-do-well, none of that stuff. That's an individual whose right to personal agency over their own body has been violated by the government of the nation where they live. And then if they've used that as the excuse to punish them for things that would not be illegal if they were not poisoning themselves illegally, then none of those other things matter either. I don't care if the guy literally had a whole warehouse full of weapons. If he hadn't used them on anybody, then he hasn't done anything.
Right.
And guess how many leftists and feminists and other such degenerates will be right in the crosshairs if that's your criteria. Because a lot of, I don't want to say us because I'm not a leftist, But a lot of the arty-farty musician types who always turn out to be leftists are also quite into that sort of thing. It's no coincidence that it's the blue cities in the US that were or the blue states that were the first to legalize these things, because it's, no one's going to pretend that it's not leftists who like drugs and it's rightists who like, well,
Church.
alcohol.
know.
And alcohol's not a drug. It's all the other drugs that the leftists like.
Yeah. Tell that to my kidneys. They don't like it. They don't like it, and they don't like ibuprofen anymore. So, and both of those are drugs. They're not happy about my coffee ingestion anymore either. This sucks. But anyway, like, just thanks, Pfizer. But anyway, all of this going back to, the men's rights movement and journalism. Like, I'm betting that he hasn't actually investigated incels, because this looks like what he wrote in the previous article about us, but just targeting incels and MGTOW. Yeah. So, I think if MRAs were able to approach this man and talk to him and have him learn more about the men's rights movement, and then he writes about the men's rights movement, then I would bet that the same thing could happen with regard to every group within the greater manosphere. He probably is never going to have good things to say about pickup artists, probably because a lot of us disagree with the gynocentrism of pickup artistry. I guess that's the best way I can put it. But I don't think that there's any way to sugarcoat the gynocentrism of pickup artistry, and if you did, it would just make you fat. So there you go. But so I don't like the claim that there's no crossover. I think that's incorrect. And in fact, like, we're a men's rights group. We're more of a men's rights public advocacy group, not an advocacy group that contacts law enforcement and legislators and stuff. But we share information with the general public. But our group includes incels. Our group includes MGTOW. Like, there's one on the show right now. And
I mean, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and technically speaking, you've been both. I think almost everybody, every man that you talk to, in particular, has at some point in his life qualified as an incel. And so it's kind of hard to say that there is no crossover with men's rights activists. Like, the people who are MGTOW because of the issues that the men's rights movement exists to address. Right? People who are incels get treated that way as a result of the issues that are the men's rights activist community exists to address. So it's kind of silly to say there's no crossover. We're just different approaches to the same problems, or we are just different ends of experience of those problems.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, we're really just different, dare I say, identities to the same problem. I've long since got over this idea that MGTOW and men's rights should be different things. They're really not. It's because we have most of the same talking points.
right.
I know that plays into the stereotypes that these feminist groups say about us, but whenever I see these arguments about you should abandon men's rights and go with MGTOW instead, or you should not worry about men's rights and go into PUAism instead. In fact, I've just posted in the live show chat a tweet I saw earlier today.
Let me put this on the screen.
Highlighting something that was said by Konstantin Kissin, of all people, who I really like.
Yeah.
But a rather hot take of his was put on Twitter by Vernon, V4 Vernon, friend of the show, who's been on the Fireside Chat, and it's wait, have you got it up yet?
Yeah, it's up, and by the way, I've been on his channel too, so.
Yeah, it's and this really fucking foot the flames at me. It's, I don't believe that the answer for men is to whine and complain, and he's about to whine and complain about men's rights movements. I'm not into like men's rights movements because more than anything else, I don't think they're effective. Forget about how they behave and the morality and whatever. We're biologically different, and we're programmed to have sympathy for women, and we're programmed to consider men disposable. That is the biological reality. You're not going to change it. Men creating movements where they protest and complain about their rights isn't going to change anything. Men just have to be better and work harder and look after their own interests.
Jeez, yeah,
we've been having this argument since way back in the day, and we've been having it with MGTOWs, and they're saying that you can't change. We're just programmed that way, and you can't change the program.
I mean, but
what do you think? What is programming? Can you not deprogram people from their programming?
And what the hell do you think looking after your own interest is? What the fuck do you think we're doing here? That's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, the government thinks we're disposable. What? There's nothing you can do about that. Let's just go along with it. Let's just agree with the government that we are disposable. Fuck's sake.
You know, a really tough part about that is people seem to think it's an instinct. And so there's some sense to that, but it's not correct. It's not an instinct. It is a habit. There's a big difference between a habit and an instinct. And our survival as a species historically has partly relied on valuing the incubator that a child grows in before birth, right? And having somebody stay at home with the children and somebody go out and take the risks. But that doesn't necessarily translate into it must be an instinct. If it is an instinct, that can be an explanation for it. But, gosh, I can't think of what the name of the logic flaw or the rhetorical fallacy that is. It's the one that's described as if A, then B, B, therefore A. So somebody in the chat can school me on it. I know it, I just can't. The terminology is just going out of my head right now. Just because B happened, though, does not necessarily mean A is the explanation. And yes, we did these historically prioritize the health and safety of women, and that is a fact. There is no denying that, and that is part of the reason why fallacy of affirming the consequent. Magritus one got it first, but yeah, like that is what we have done throughout history. But it doesn't necessarily mean we can't treat men as equally valuable, and we don't have it in us to do it. It doesn't. Then we have Richard Bier, let's see, says, post box versus ergo hoc. Oh, and Jay Robitel says, ergo proctor hoc. And those are the ones that the terms that I couldn't get to come to mind. That's Latin, and I don't actually speak it. So, but essentially, it's a significant mistake. When you make that mistake, you are assuming that the conclusion proves the evidence instead of the evidence proving the conclusion.
Right.
And so here's the situation with humanity. We do have, I think, the capacity to value all human beings. We have the capacity to recognize that all human life is valuable. And if we didn't have that capacity, there would be nothing men could do to earn their place in the world, to make themselves valuable. Contributing to society wouldn't do it. Their masculinity would erase it. I'm safe from the No, I doubt I'm safe from the FBI. But But because we do have a history of at least valuing men when they do things for society, even if we haven't recognized their value just as human beings, that demonstrates that we can value men. If we can value men, then we can value them just because they're human. So I like Vernon's answer to this. Translation: I'm too morally lazy to recognize that men should have equal dignity and worth as a human being and not below women, and I'm playing the biology card because I'm too cowardly to stand for men and dare say that men shouldn't be regarded as disposable.
Very
And
nice.
you think about this. What is the benefit, the true benefit, if any, of treating men as disposable? Because in my opinion, there is not one. And it's like I've said before, I don't believe in male violence. If you look at different types of violence that are attributed to men, a large majority of them involve either the acquisition of resources that they would not have to acquire if they were not supporting women or trying to attract women, trying to impress women, right? When there's violence against women, it's trying to connect with women. It's very, very misguided. It's obviously very, very dysfunctional, but it is still an attempt at connection. And then when we have nations go to war against each other, it's for land acquisition and resource acquisition on behalf of the aggressor's own population of women, right, to support the women. And this is all stuff that would be eliminated if women were equally accountable, equally responsible for resource production and acquisition and so on, and men didn't accept, you have to be violent because I need something from women. We would get down to the point where the only violence left would be the violence perpetrated by people who are significantly dysfunctional, and that is both men and women.
Yeah.
Right, we have a shitload of proxy violence. Very little violence that is not proxy violence. And so I don't think it's instinct. I think it is social programming. And social programming can be undone. That's what cult deprogramming is all about.
Yeah, and it seems to transcend this rather reductive binary of left and right. That's why I felt the need to post this, because this show is largely about this article by this ostensible Labour supporter with all these other identities. The last person in the world you would expect to be sympathetic to the men's rights movement. And he's there saying all these things about, they're sort of misunderstood, and maybe they have things to say. And meanwhile, here's Konstantin Kirsin, this guy who's ostensibly, very vocally anti-woke or whatever, and he's given out these same bullshit arguments that we've been hearing since way back in 2014. The bullshit reasons to ignore the men's rights movements, and he did say it as a plural, and it is a plural, to be honest, because it's several movements from all kind of directions, and it goes to show you, like, this is why the men's rights movement is not inclined with either the left or the right. It really is this whole other area, this whole other axis on the political spectrum. It's neither left nor right, and I'd like to say it's more libertarian than authoritarian, because it does seem to line up in that way far more than it lines up with anything left and right. Like there are leftist men's rights advocates, there are rightist men's rights advocates, but we're overwhelmingly libertarian. Even those of us who wouldn't identify. And I imagine that includes most of us. Most of us are small L libertarian leaning, but we don't wear that on our sleeve. But we almost all of us seem to be in the libertarian leaning way of things. But even having said that, it seems to be a whole other axis apart from that, because the political spectrum is not just 2-dimensional. It's not even 3-dimensional. It's looking like it's 10D chess at this point.
Well, there's a whole lot of different polarities. You have, besides having authoritarian versus libertarian and collectivist versus individualist, and you also have, I would say, a degree of altruistic versus maybe solipsistic or nihilistic, I don't know. But basically people who are more focused on, even if they're individualist, they're more focused on being helpful or being beneficial to their community versus people that are more interested in focusing on just themselves and don't feel obligated to care about the rest of the community. And then you also have, like the polarity between people who promote the idea of equality, like, or rather, not collectivism, but community versus tribalism, where you think about your particular tribe as superior or more important or so on, versus everybody else being second fiddle. And I think those different poles affect where you fall in terms of the other poles. A person who is more community-minded might be a libertarian individual that accepts some degrees of collectivism and people's choice to collectivize things. So it's really hard to like put it on a grid and say, well, this is where people stand. And I hate those charts because they never quite capture the way I think of things, for instance. And you also have people who are very focused on ethics, and you have people who are very, like, they don't give a fuck about ethics, right? So you could even look at the D&D charts of lawful and chaotic versus good and evil. If you replace good and evil with, I guess, altruism and solipsism, or altruism and nihilism, then you would still have things that are very different, that aren't included in that chart, that people base their politics on. I just don't know. I don't think that there's one model you can put everybody in and have them fit and be described accurately.
I came out as chaotic good in my D&D thing, so I'm convinced they're all Barnum statements. They just tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to that, but not quite. I'm almost chaotic neutral, partly because of the way I view good and evil, depending on I have a more libertarian approach to good and evil than I guess D&D does. Whether or not someone else is harmed and whether or not you have valid reason for it, But in any case, like, in this, what that boils down to in terms of this piece is when we see, the first half of this article and how great it was, and then we see this with statements about incels and stuff. Clearly, more needs to be discussed with this guy. And I will say, maybe he'll come on and talk to Brian, or maybe he'd come on and talk to us. I think he's open to talking to people and learning more about the different issues and the different groups and everything, and just hasn't done it yet. So, like, that's disappointing to see. But in light of the other changes in the way that he's discussing this, it's not as disappointing as it would be by itself. Let's see. Academic papers on the manosphere are an education in how thoroughly the activists have embedded themselves in society and gender studies.
So Discord and your updates.
Lauren?
Sorry, Discord. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
I can hear you and another sound in the background, actually.
sorry. I don't know what the hell is going on.
Oh, is Discord
right,
trying to update at your end or something all of a sudden?
Yes.
Oh, that's so stupid. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm gonna go on then. Let's see. Indeed, to simply gain admission to the forum, members must assent to basic rules, including hate speech policies and anti-bullying measures. The chat room hosts support channels for LGBT members and those dealing with divorce and mental health issues. And similarly with the honey badgers, now we do not. I don't think we have. I don't think we have a hate speech policy. I don't think we use that term. But if someone in our group starts bullying other members of our group, and there's a conflict, there's a whole process we go through to try to resolve it. And we haven't had very many people have to leave our Discord because we do seek resolution first. But it's happened. Every so often you get somebody that just can't be nice to other people and accommodate other people, but still expects other people to be nice to them and to be accommodated. And that doesn't work well in groups of people anywhere. I hate the term hate speech. I'll be honest. I don't hate a lot of things, but the term hate speech really drives me nuts because it's not used equally. Right? When you say stereotyping, cruel things or disparaging things about a demographic of people, that can communicate hate. It can also just communicate ignorance. More often, in my experience, it communicates ignorance. Like, we could call it hate speech to make the claims that the writer has made about incels, for instance. But I think that they're more rightfully attributed to ignorance. Ignorance does not constitute hate. Like, you don't hate math when you're just starting out kindergarten and all you know is how to count, and you don't necessarily know how to add or subtract or multiply or divide or any of that. You have to learn those things. And so if you are asked to perform an evaluation of an equation and you don't know how to do it and you get the answer wrong, if you talk about that in a social sense, we call it hate speech, but really it's just ignorance. And and in math we can tell that's ignorance. It doesn't mean you hate math. People might say they hate math if that's hard. They can learn to hate the subject or fear the subject or be have anxiety around the subject if they have a teacher who doesn't help them figure out the best way to learn. But the term hate speech is such crap. It's a junk term.
I mean, the word hate is just so liberally applied these days.
That's true.
It's so hard to tell, when you should actually be it's not really difficult to tell when you should be reacting to it if you have your faculties about you. Because I'm sorry, I reject the notion outright. I don't think there's any such thing as hate speech. There's just that you don't like. That's it.
And even if it wasn't liberally applied, even if there was anything approaching an objective description of hate, it's still just an emotion. I know it's tried to be portrayed as something more, but it isn't. It's love is an emotion and hate is an emotion. And how are you supposed to judge people for the emotions they get across? Do you ban someone for being angry? Do you ban someone for being afraid? No, any of this is just hokey bullshit. You approach what people are actually saying. If they're actually threatening people's lives, then yes, that's a problem. But that requires a much more objective term than hate speech.
Yeah,
it's actual, legitimate threats on people's lives and such. But that's it gets confused with this idea of hate, because that's not hate speech. That's credible threats. Hate speech is just a very dramatic way of saying anger at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
everyone's entitled to their anger.
And it's often wrong because if you stereotype someone in a way that doesn't necessarily communicate anger or a negative prejudice, where you're saying a bad thing about that person as opposed to a good thing about that person, it certainly doesn't communicate. Hate is defined, like if you look in Merriam-Webster, it says intense hostility and aversion usually deriving from fear, anger, or a sense of injury. Let's see. We have a couple of others. Dictionary.com says to dislike intensely or passionately. And Cambridge actually refers to people to dislike someone or something very much. But several of the different dictionaries, Collins says intense dislike or aversion. And so you have these different dictionaries all using intense or passionate or strong dislike. It's not just, it's a step beyond dislike. It's not just dislike, and it's usually based on other emotions. It's building on other emotions. Dictionary.com has synonyms to it listed: loathing, detestation, abhorrence. These are all strong words, right? So when they use the term hate speech, they've put a strong word out there, and then it's used to describe things that are not necessarily profound behaviors or passionate behaviors or impactful behaviors. Like if you think, oh, what's one of the stupidest misconceptions that I've ever... the misconception that all black people play basketball. Like, just, dumb to assume that because someone is of a particular race, they like a particular sport and engage in it. Like, like our no black nerds, right? Dumb idea. It's just ignorance. And it's not necessarily, there's no emotion attached to that. It's a thing that people believe because the stereotype exists, right? So if you apply the same language to describing that type of ignorance that you would describe to somebody who wanted laws changed or engaged in behaviors toward individual people because they think all black people are criminals, that's a different problem. If someone's mistreating people because they have a misconception that goes population-wide and they're excusing actual cruel behaviors or harmful behaviors using that misconception, much stronger language should be used to discuss that. Because there should be a response to that, to change that situation. It's more of an emergency. Like if someone just has a stupid misconception about basketball, like you can engage them and talk about it and everything, but in the long run, it's just annoying. It doesn't do any harm. It's a much bigger issue if someone is going to point a gun at their neighbor for being the wrong skin color, or won't hire them because they just assume, well, this person's going to steal from me because skin color. Like, that's a big issue. Something has to be done about it when that's happening. And yes, having those little dumb misconceptions can build into the big misconceptions, and they still should be addressed. But you still have to be able to recognize which one is a right now emergency and which one is, we do have to do something about this so that it doesn't build up to that. It's a lot like the difference between getting the wiring fixed in your house so a fire doesn't start versus, well, there's a fire right now, so what we really need to do is call the fire department. It's too late to fix the wiring, right? But the house down the street that has the same problem, yeah, we definitely, they can fix their wiring, and that needs to be done too. But we still need the fire department right now, right? We don't do that when we generalize all forms of stupidity that are evolve around tribalism as hate speech. It screws us out of being able to deal effectively with those issues. We also have a super chat from Albert Nader Retro, $5.50 Canadian. Said, Lauren, I'm going to DM you my email via Facebook. Write me and I'll send you my Thor piece. Then you can pass it on to Hannah and Mike too if he'd like to see it. So, Mike, what were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. And then there's the idea that black people are good at basketball just because they're black, or the idea that Asian people are good at mathematics just because they're Asian, or the idea that women are, perfect and pure and empathetic just because they're women. This is given the curious title benevolent sexism or benevolent misogyny. And misogyny, as you know, means hatred of women. And so for a long time now we've had this idea of benevolent hate.
Yeah.
And people who use it don't quite understand what a contradiction in terms they're using. If even hate can be benevolent, then your words can't express how lost you are in this spiral of newspeak.
Yeah, when we start trying to use these kinds of generalizations of people's feelings and condemn people's feelings and thoughts and everything. So, it's like I said on HBR News Tuesday, people have a right to their own thoughts. If somebody hates me, they have a right to do that, right? They have a right to absolutely loathe me. They don't have a right to mistreat me because of it in a situation where I have a right to be there, right? So they can't come into my house and beat me up because they hate me, right? It's illegal to break into my house for one thing, and beating somebody up is illegal. And if it was someone in my workplace, they don't have a right to harass me at work because they hate me, right? There's those things, but you have a right to any attitude until you act on it in a way that impacts the other person against their rights. The reason it's illegal to break into my house is because I have a right to my space. The reason it's illegal to beat me up is because I have a right to bodily integrity. Right? I have a right to nonviolence from you. As long as I'm not violent toward you first, then you have a right to defend yourself. It's one of the reasons men learn to be less violent toward each other and women don't. Because men, when they defend themselves, it's serious.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When women defend themselves, it's sometimes comical. It's embarrassing. Some women are good at it. But not very many.
No.
And some women only learn to grab a shovel when they have to defend themselves. And I'm sure anybody that's looked up chick fights on YouTube knows which video I'm talking about. But because of all that, like I said, this language that we're seeing and the tendency to write this stuff, like I don't expect a miracle with the first article, but I would sure love to see this guy talk to more people within the manosphere and learn more about the manosphere, because it seems like he's capable of, going into forums and learning about people and learning about the reasons behind people's way that they approach these issues, and recognizing that, maybe these people aren't evil. Maybe I've been painting them with too broad of a brush. Gosh. Restream bot wants to know what video. That's the video of the chick that hits the other chick with a shovel. Like, that video is so old.
I need to see that now.
And what's weird?
They get into a fight. They get mad at each other. They get into a fight and they start, messing with each other. And all of a sudden, one of them goes and grabs a shovel and just whacks the other one.
Oh my God! I remember it was the I don't want to call
the sound doesn't play in the video,
call it white
but
trash,
it should.
But that's kind of what they look like.
Yeah, that's the that's basically the term for white people who are low income and engage in crass behaviors that the upper classes find distasteful. They call us. I have been called white trash. So, and part of the reason that I have been called white trash is because in the course of defending myself, I know how to slug someone with a closed fist instead of grabbing their hair and pulling or slapping them with an open hand. That apparently makes me white trash.
Oh my God!
I kid you not. And that's for somebody who prefers to refrain from doing any of those things. I don't want to do any of those things. I would rather have a discussion and hear everything you don't like about me and see if I can address it.
Yeah.
I might not come to an agreement with you, but at least we'll talk it out, and you'll be heard. But yeah. So going on.
We don't have that term in Britain, by the way. They're just called, chavs and townies and scallies and pikeys at a stretch.
Well, and they're different names in different places. Like I think it's the same term for a ghost that hides in a small enclosed space in the UK is used to describe what people in the United States would call white trash or trailer trash, because apparently living in a trailer is bad too. Not just inexpensive. But in the US, I think it's like boggin or boggart or something like that. Bogan. Yeah.
That's an Australian term. But bogan is the Australian term for a chav, or what you would call a hillbilly or a redneck.
Yeah, and see, I got hillbilly heritage, so.
So do I.
Yeah.
So do I.
Like I at some place in my home, like tucked into a box somewhere, I have a recipe card that has ways to make critters palatable.
Oh, honey, I'm Cajun, okay? we eat roadkill, okay?
Yes.
That's it.
And, like, there are some things that it's better if you soak them in buttermilk to get the oils out, and there are some things that it's better to soak in vinegar so they won't be gamey, and, there's, I could actually go out in my backyard right now and find food right this minute if I wanted to. Well, maybe not right now because I think there's snow. I haven't been outside all day, so I don't know. But, yeah. Like I'll eat plantain and dandelion leaves if I don't have something else, because I know how.
Yeah.
So yeah. There's definitely no, I don't think there are recipes for slugs. Earthworms, yes, but they don't taste good raw, so I would definitely cook them or something. Like personal experience, they taste like fish flavored mud. But and there's a story, but I'm not going to tell it right now, because that is a hell of a tangent.
Of course, Hannah, of course there's a story. There's
always
a
okay,
story.
The short version of that is the first time I ate an earthworm was...
Oh, wait, there was more than one time?
Well, yeah, I had to find out why it tasted like that, whether it was because I dipped it in a puddle to clean it off, or whether it was just the way earthworms taste, and it's the way earthworms taste. But I ate an earthworm to prove I was right in an argument. They're not poisonous.
Let me try this earthworm with a side of pond scum and see if that is.
Yeah.
Hannah, you I swear, I almost want. I wish that I had grown up with you just to go through the shit.
Oh,
I wish
I'd grown up with you too, though. That would have been fun.
I'm glad you never ate a slug, by the way, Hannah. Cause
no. Slugs are bad for you.
You watch Mr. Bolin as much as I do, and he did that one video about that one guy who ate a slug, and then they're not just not edible; they contain parasites that can paralyze you and then kill you.
It's really awful. Like slugs are horrible. But you can eat earthworms, you can eat spiders. They do bite back. It's not good. But you can. Like, I don't know that I'd recommend eating a brown recluse unless you don't ever want to talk again or kill it first. But, you can eat some types of crickets. Like, there's bugs you can eat. The only problem is that some people are allergic to some types of bugs. And, like, if you're sensitive to red food coloring, don't eat bugs. And don't let anybody tell you that you have to, because that's a trap too. And yeah, slugs and snails are two very different things. And also, if you pick up random bugs on the ground and put them in your mouth, eventually you are going to get bit by something that will make things swell up and look funny.
If you're just picking random bugs up off the ground,
hey, I was a 2-year-old out in the woods. Come on, I put all kinds of things in my mouth.
2 years old is one thing, right? But if you're a grown, fully functional adult and you're picking things up off of the ground, you might as well be a window licker. And I think there's probably a padded room with your name on it.
You will eat the bugs, Lauren. You will eat the bugs, and you will live in the pod.
But in any case, like that goes back to the authoritarianism versus non-authoritarianism here, you know, and yeah, my mom, when I was a kid, my mom had to watch me really close. She had to be very authoritarian when I was a little kid to keep me from putting caterpillars in my mouth and stuff like that, and rocks and sticks and dirt and whatever else. Like,
Yeah,
that was just a thing. Some kids will put everything in their mouth.
I have a feeling you were a bit of a handful.
I was curious about everything, and I've always been curious about everything. That's probably why I went into journalism as one of the things that I did growing up, because you know, I mean, if you're going to investigate everything, then you want to tell people about it too. This thing happened in this place at this time. Journalism.
Like Nancy Drew.
Yeah. Like, that building was on fire. Like, that's journalism. Just saying, that building was on fire. The fire department came and put the fire out. It took this many trucks. It took this many hours. This is what's left. And this is what the people that lived in it or owned it or whatever are doing now to recover from the fire. Like, those are things. That's journalism. And I used to do that all the time.
This is what your traffic commute is going to look like if you're passing through this area.
Yeah. Yeah, this is what traffic is going to look like if you're passing through this area. This is, you know, this is where the fundraiser is if you want to donate to it. You know, that just telling people that information. That's journalism. Where it's not so much journalism if you're like, well, these people deserve to have their house burned down because they were assholes. That's not journalism.
Yeah, right.
These people, you shouldn't donate to their fundraiser because, yeah, they suffered a tragedy, but they're whining about it. Not journalism. That's how feminists report about us.
Yeah.
But to get back to, you know, discussing the forums and everything, everybody's forum's going to be a little different. We're kind of knock down, drag out here. And we have some arguments in our Discord, like some massive arguments sometimes over different political. We have people in our Discord with very, very differing political perspectives, from far left to far right, from very authoritarian to very libertarian. I'm not the only anarcho-cap in the group. We have people who really think that the solution to every men's issue is new laws, government top down. And then we have those of us who think exactly the opposite of that. But we are all able to unify on one thing. Men are as important as women. Men are as human as women. And if something is a human rights issue, that means all humans, not just women, not just men, all humans. And so if we're going to have laws, if we're going to have a government, there's going to be a government, and they're going to have laws governing an aspect of human life. Those laws should not differentiate in respect for human rights between men and women. When you walk into a courtroom and you are on trial for something, or you have a civil case for something, the outcome of that case should not be determined by your sex. And any policy or tolerance for prejudice in the court or in our legislation, that needs to be removed. And that's what our goals are. And even those of us that are ANCAP recognize that we live in a nation or a set of nations that are governed. We don't have the circumstances that we want. And you deal with the circumstances that exist, not the circumstances you want. Even if you strive for or argue for the circumstances that you want. And I think that's one of the things that MGTOW do in terms of advising men how to live right now, right? Yes, we want to see equally shared parenting. We want to see the elimination of the child support system because of equally shared parenting. If both parents have the kids an equal amount of time, then there is not a need for one parent to pay the other parent to care for the child, because they're both doing it. And they both have equal opportunity to work and support their households instead of one parent supporting two households, right? We want to see non-discrimination in criminal court and things like that. These are things that all of us can agree on, right? Regardless of, where we stand from. But they're things that we want to see happen. And where MGTOW comes in is, okay, yes, it would be great if those things were true, but they're not right now. So right now, if you get married, there's a likelihood of a divorce or a chance of a divorce where you're going to get all of your possessions taken away, where you're going to be subject to this child support order, where your kids are going to be taken away from you, and you're not going to be able to see them. It's important for you to defend yourself against those things, right? And if you cannot vet for character and be certain, be trusting that this is not going to happen to you, then you don't get married. You don't get into that situation. You don't take that risk. And that's a very valid response to the circumstances that men are living in today, right? And that goes along with the whole taxation system, taxation and spending system, the whole criminal justice system, that it's a defensive type of living, and it is important. That we have that defensive type of living. And the same thing with, I'm not a big fan of game theory. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the hoopla that gets sold to men by pickup artists in the pickup artist community. But when they do talk about, focus on yourself first. Don't focus on who you're going for. Focus on who you are and what you are, and make yourself a partner worth being interested in before you go try to find someone to partner with. That's good advice. That's not bad advice. And it is, again, well, all right, if you want to get this situation, here's the steps you have to take. All right, that's fair. So all these different groups that are getting demonized for these different ways of handling the same situations, I think a lot of misconceptions that people have would be quickly alleviated if they gave those communities a closer examination.
Yeah. And I think something that is really being missed is that, self-preservation is one of our most intrinsic behaviors, right? We all exist. We all do what everything, every act, from the moment you wake up to the time you lay your head down, it's an act of self-preservation, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And this is what these men are doing. They're saying, I don't want to be subject to these laws that are discriminating against me. So my self-defense is to either opt out of dealing with that altogether, or, well, that really is the only other option. Either you're in or you're out,
Yeah.
But it's not wrong for someone to want to defend themselves at all, and to take that and try to twist it into some sort of negative is so it's wrong on so many levels.
Yeah, there's a way that I think would make it easier to describe, and all the Gen Xers will recognize this probably. There's an old sketch from the Muppets with the pigs, the Muppet pigs, climbing the side of a mountain, singing. I can't remember the name of the piece that they're singing, but at one point there's a part of the song that has a long syllable, and they drag the syllable out and they throw their head back when they sing it, and every time they sing that part, the pig on the at the end of the rope, the last pig in the line, falls down off the mountain. And the first one falls, and then they're like, oh, well, they shake it off and they start climbing up the mountain some more, and they get to that part of the song again, the second one falls off, and pretty soon there's like one pig left, and he's climbing along and he's singing the song, and he gets to that part, and I honestly don't remember if he sings it or he doesn't, but he's scared to death of singing that part. And because you learn, if you see this repeated behavior result in this terrible experience, then it becomes a behavior that's scary for you to engage in. And it would be the same as like if there was a bridge across a huge chasm, and you noticed that as people are walking back and forth across this bridge, sometimes a bit of the bridge just falls away underneath someone and they fall through to their death. And you personally are looking at that bridge, you can't tell for certain how to predict what part of that bridge is going to fall. You can't personally figure out a way to mitigate your chances of being the person that gets dropped through the bridge to your death. Then you maybe might be a little hesitant to walk across that bridge.
Yeah.
You might suggest that the bridge needs to be shored up, and other people might agree with you that the bridge needs to be shored up. But if somebody comes along and says, well, okay, yeah, we're going to agree that the bridge needs to be shored up, but while we're working on that project, let's not stop using it. You're going to be like, no, you don't understand. I don't want to fall through. That's pretty much common sense. That's MGTOW.
Yeah. I think
you can fix the bridge, but I'm not falling through while you're in the process.
Right. I think I found the video that you're talking about.
Yeah, I probably can't get away with playing it on air.
The Happy Wanderer.
The Happy Wanderer. That's it. Yeah, and it's like, it's about a 2-minute video, and it's on YouTube, so you'll have to watch it. Like other people will have to find it and watch it. But definitely that situation, like when it comes to condemning MGTOW, I think it's because people don't understand the sense behind the phenomenon. Like, this is just men being reasonably cautious to avoid something that they see happening to other men in droves. Right. So, and yeah.
Valderie, Valdera.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to sing that because I'm just not. Sorry. But it's at that part where, it's the long they fall over backwards.
Yep.
So, yeah. Indeed, I read that part. The influence of outside forces, particularly academia and feminist organizations, in shaping the prevailing opinion of the men's rights movement is a common point of frustration among members of the chat. Because the movement is diffuse and leaderless, it's highly susceptible to being co-opted by toxic forces or misrepresented to outsiders, members of the chat argue. Well, I would argue the first part of that isn't necessarily true. Because it is diffuse and leaderless, it's difficult for anybody to get a grip on the movement and say, you have to do things my way. Because like B-Board, it's in 4chan, it is the prevailing attitude is not your personal army, right? We do what we do based on our outlook on the issues, and we can unite for purposes that suit that outlook. But it's like herding cats. You're not going to create a cult in this movement very easily, because you're going to get somebody that's going to call you out. Like that's just the way it is. Like even with the love-hate relationship society seems to have with Andrew Tate. Like our movement, for the most part, looked at him and went, well, he's doing the same thing other PUAs are doing. This is just the latest, greatest, next best PUA. He's interesting. Definitely got some things wrong. Definitely saying some good things. And now, everybody hates him for it. But he's not exactly one of us. We're not going to condemn or promote him. Like, that's it. Not very cultish, if you ask me. So there you go.
And, given the statement, men creating movements where they protest and complain about their rights isn't going to change anything, please notice that Hannah and Lauren here are not men. Maybe you're right, Constantine. Maybe men complaining about the ongoing destruction of their own human rights is not going to get them anywhere. Maybe nothing gets done in terms of human rights unless it's women advocating for it, and that's why feminism has got so far, because it's so principally women doing it. But I would point out, men's rights advocates are not necessarily all men. I don't know how much that blows your mind after 10 years and counting of Honey Badger Radio, doing what you bunch of Johnny-come-latelys have only just discovered. But yeah, check it out. Women also give a shit about men having human rights. Or dare I say, whatever you want to call it.
No.
So maybe that helps you give a shit now that women are doing it. And 10 years since women have been doing it. And maybe that says something to or about you. Either you don't care about men giving a shit about their own rights, or you don't care about anyone giving a shit about men's rights. And maybe that's your problem. Hey, maybe you're the one with the problem. Maybe you're the one of billions with the problem.
Yeah, this is one of the things that our critics never quite understand. A lot of them probably are looking at the last maybe 10 years when they look at men's rights activists. If we're lucky. They might even only be looking at the last 5 years. Men's rights activism has been around since the early 20th century. And when I say early, I mean like before you're thinking, before most people are thinking. I'm talking about during the suffragette movement, men's rights activism existed. Because there were issues at that point in time. Even under coverture, when women were under coverture and had the capacity to sue men for breach of promise to marry. That was a thing in the United States in the early 20th century and the 19th century and before. That was a thing in Canada too. Right? Those things were problems that men discussed. And there were women in the movement. I can't remember her last name, but one of them was actually named Hannah. So there you go. That's my reincarnation story. But seriously, like you look up something called the Badger Game. It isn't about us. I can tell you that. Just there were different things. There was another one, honey trapping, and there's a type of lawsuit, and it wasn't called a broken heart lawsuit, but that's basically what it was about. You're not allowed to break a woman's heart. And these things, yeah, Davey 1602 says it still goes on in India today, and that's true. And that was, quote unquote, before women's rights. Like women had rights before women's rights. That should tell you something. Under coverture, men had responsibilities, and women had rights. But there were restrictions on women's rights in order to facilitate men's ability to meet their responsibilities. All the elimination of coverture did was eliminate those restrictions. Men still have responsibilities and women still have rights. But now women's rights are not restricted in ways designed to facilitate men's ability to meet their responsibilities. And that is a huge portion of why there are men's issues. Because it isn't men and women have rights and men and women have responsibilities. That's the problem. We need it to be men and women have rights and men and women have responsibilities. And the restrictions on your rights as a human being are based on the boundaries between your personal agency and the other person's personal autonomy.
Yep.
Right? That's it. Your rights end where my nose begins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, until I breach your nose, and then you have the right to breach mine right back. That's it, right? And that's where we need to be, or rather, what we're fighting about. And what we've been fighting about for 100 years. But most people that write about the men's rights movement, they don't write about MRAs from 1923. They only write about MRAs from 2023. So they don't know. That's probably why we end up with the misconceptions that we're seeing here. Now this line, and I'm gonna say this, and I'll let you respond, guys. I will point out, everybody has a right to run their Discord their own way. What I take issue with is a characterization that I consider to be very, very stereotyping and very unfortunate and false. But it says, not only do they ban women-hating incels, the chat itself includes several women. So like I said, I take issue with the women-hating incels characterization. I don't consider criticism to be hatred. I think it's very important to distinguish between the two. And I don't think banning is an effective way of changing the way people think. If somebody is to the point, if they're black-pilled to the point where they do just flat out hate women, you're not going to change their mind about that by banning them from your Discord to protect the sensibilities of the women in the Discord.
Right. And you know, very often I think a lot of these people are not, they don't hate all women. They're mad at something that happened with certain women in their lives at some point, and they then project that fear onto all women, which is not necessarily misplaced, but it can be misused or misaligned or you know what I mean? It's you can't blame every single woman for something that one woman did to you, but that doesn't mean that they hate all women. Yeah. They need their thinking readjusted to reflect reality, you know? And I'm telling you, therapy is something that a lot of people really clearly need and are not getting, you know? Because when you're left alone to your own devices with your own thoughts, that's where the bad things happen. You know, you need to be, if you don't have anyone to be a soundboard to, you know, if you have no one that you can talk to and just kind of relate to like normal human beings do, then what you're left with is your own thoughts, and it can just lead you down this very dark path. And it's, even though some of the things that led you there may be true, it's, you know, you just kind of have to, you know how they say touch grass.
Well, one of the things I would point out is, like, when someone makes a statement that is a heavy criticism, and they make a generalization that's a heavy criticism of women, the fact is, it's hard for a woman to listen to it if she doesn't want to view herself that way, right?
Yeah.
But let's say, you know, you're in a forum and a guy says something to the effect of, women don't consider men's men's humanity when they make decisions. Like, say, it's a heavy criticism. It might be hurtful to hear if you're not trying to think through it and everything. And it is a generalization. Well, for me, my perspective is, I want to know where that came from. What made him think that? Because it's at least partly valid. Women in general don't consider men's humanity before they make their decisions. It's not fair, and I think a lot of women feel like they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when someone says something like that, well, what are you approaching that from? Are you approaching it from a perspective of wanting to understand that person, or are you approaching it from a perspective of wanting to defend yourself?
Yeah.
Because if you do approach it from the first standard, from the first perspective, you can accomplish both. But if you approach it just from the second perspective, you're likely to accomplish neither.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've had tough conversations with some people as a result of that, where like step by step, I'm hearing some very tough criticisms, like most women's maturity level never goes beyond what is expected of a boy at 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, on what basis do you say that? And, you kind of learn a little bit more about what is expected of 14-year-old boys versus what is expected of girls as they get older. And for instance, let's look at living as a couple. Every boy knows that he is going to be responsible as he grows up. At 14, every boy knows that he's going to be responsible for his living expenses. All of them. Nobody else is going to be responsible for those. But girls, when they grow up and get married, can never be responsible again for their living expenses. They can let a man be responsible for their living expenses entirely, and then they can walk away from that marriage and take his responsibility for her living expenses with him. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have that one. Another one is if you have a heterosexual experience, a guy knows that he is responsible for how both participants in the experience feel about the experience afterward. He's responsible for how he feels about it, and he's responsible for how she feels about it. Right? A woman knows that she is not responsible for how either of them feel about it. So, at 14, a guy might be more responsible for a woman than a woman, I should say, because at 14, he can be raped by an adult woman and still be treated like he is responsible for how both of them feel about the experience. And so it is fair, when somebody says something like that. And it is fair, those criticisms. There are reasons why those points of view exist. And so the discussion shouldn't be about shame on you for thinking that way. The discussion should be, all right, what can we do about that? What needs to change, and how can we change it? Or how can we navigate this? Like, how can you live in that situation? How can I live in that situation? And sometimes the conversation needs to be both.
Yep.
But if we just say, well, we ban these people because they're hateful, and we don't have those tough conversations, like there are safe spaces. I understand that. And it is fair for people to make those decisions about their forums themselves. And that's their forum. But it's one of the reasons why in the Honey Badger forum, for instance, we're more likely to have the tough conversation and explore avenues of thinking and ideas for, how do we reconcile this? Like, how do we deal with this? What are we going to advocate for as a result of this? And so on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As opposed to, Well, shame on you for thinking that way. Get out. Like, that's really not going to solve anything.
No, no, it's not.
So, and at the same time, you have, like, I've met people that are dealing with a lot of pain and that are down on themselves. Women don't like me because I'm ugly. Are you sure you're ugly? Maybe the women that you've met are judgmental. What kind of women are you hanging out with? Like, and also, what is your attitude toward yourself? And you have to be able to help people build on themselves and build themselves up, and elevate themselves a little bit, and stop focusing on other people's way of thinking about them, because you have to decide who you are. You cannot let other people dictate that to you,
Right.
if you want to survive. And we don't want people to eventually deteriorate into suicidal ideology and be lost to us. And we've had those conversations with multiple people. So, like, again, like, I don't know, our forum might be a little too rough for some reporters, but it'd be interesting to have the same kind of conversations in the Honey Badger forum with this particular journalist, and see if he still thinks the same way of MGTOW and incels as afterward as before.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I think you meant suicidal ideation, but nowadays it very much is suicidal ideology.
Actually, yeah, I did. I'm kind of tired. You're right, though. But yeah, there is a suicidal ideology. It's called medical assistance in dying, and it's actually turning into something else, because now it's being imposed. Egregious Charles gave us $5 and said, I think the woke would much rather punish wrong thinkers than have them change their minds. Yeah, and that is relational aggression, which is more feminine than masculine. And I think the sad thing is, that particular pathway into the sort of dark bog of authoritarianism and oppression and eventual mass murder is driven by women. Not driven by all women, but it is driven by the type of women who are petty and mean and use social rules and social standards as a way to knock other people down rather than elevating themselves. Queen bees, bullies, essentially. Female bullies.
I mean, but you know what? I just kind of want to point out that, it when you describe a person like that, you would think of, like, just someone that's really egregious and really just outward with that kind of behavior. But you'll find, if you really talk to some women, that, they might seem very innocuous on the outside, right? But if you really drill down, they will do the exact same thing. They'll tell you, "Oh no, I would never do that. I'd never behave that way. I'm not that kind of girl." But if you put them in a position where they can find some way to gain some sort of benefit from it, they will absolutely flip their morals right on their heads.
Yeah. I guess a good way I can describe it is this: the type of person who facilitated getting society from in every genocide, every politicide, from this demographic is wrong thinkers and inferior and bad people, and we don't have to treat them equally to everyone else because we don't like them. Every society where that's happened, where it's gone from that to a mass murder, the people who have facilitated it in their neighborhoods and outside of like police authority, just not changing the politics of their country because this is working for them, are the same people who would go to the manager of a grocery store and say, you got to get that guy out of here that's quietly shopping over in the produce section and filling his basket with produce that he's going to buy because he stinks and he doesn't respect women and I think he's homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That guy looked at my butt. Get him out of here. Right? That's that kind of person that does that.
Right.
Is the one that pushes it forward every single time. That's the person who says, well, if we're going to have this conversation, we should make sure that the LGBTQ plus people of color with disabilities and a history of working in this particular type of industry should get to talk first. Like, fuck you, no.
Right.
Right? That's not going to happen in our forum. And at the same time, they're the people that would take the shortcuts. Well, this person is this color, so we don't have to listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
This person is from this demographic, so their opinion doesn't matter. And in fact, this person is from this demographic. This is their opinion. Anybody who holds this opinion is bad because a person of this demographic holds it, and they're bad. Right? That's how that goes. It's relational aggression on steroids, or wheels on a slope, with a kazoo. For those that remember the opening to Dragons, Wagons, and Wax, of the dragon going down the mountain on a wagon with a kazoo.
And an LGBTQ flag with a Ukraine symbol on the back.
Oh yeah. Yep. So it goes on. Kay, a 21-year-old American college junior, is concerned with issues of diversity, and inclusion, and has even been labeled woke by some who know her. She has an upbringing similar to Peter's and, like him, became interested in the men's rights movement after seeing how boys were treated differently by teachers. So even people who fall prey to the shorthand of wokeism can still see through the shit of gynocentrism and male disposability. It's not an instinct. Thinking people can escape it. I started noticing a lot of inconsistencies and unfairness toward both genders, she said. I think the most damaging misconception is that men's rights activists are incels or hate women, said Mason, a 17-year-old British college student. I mean, so far everyone I've met in the community are positive and welcoming. Well, that doesn't debunk the incel thing, because there are plenty of incels that are positive and welcoming, but they all have one thing in common. They're all single and not having sex, right? But there are people in the movement that are parents. There are people in the movement that are grandparents. There are people in the movement that are married. There are people in the movement that are in relationships but not married. Right? So not everybody in the movement has the same motivation, the same motivational experiences. Right? I'm in it because as a due process advocate, I gravitated toward this movement. Men are more likely to experience discrimination in the courts. And in particular, they're more likely to face a lack of due process because of discrimination on the basis of their gender. So, Mason had been in an abusive relationship in high school. When he asked for support from his friends, Mason was told to man up and get over it.
Well, that's the patriarchy for you, isn't it?
Yes. Oh my gosh. The self-help community became his gateway to the movement, because we're drug. Jordan Peterson became a new source of confidence, and he eventually ditched his firm atheism in favor of Christianity.
Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, please.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know Jordan Peterson was evangelical.
We appreciate everything you've done for us, Dr. Peterson.
Yeah.
I really didn't know he was evangelical. though. That's interesting. Well, it's not that it's a bad thing. Like I'm some people are. I'm not really. I prefer to just practice what I practice, and if people like it and want to know about it, they'll ask me. And if they don't, I'm not gonna fix their problems by trying to talk them into it. But there you go. Maybe he's not evangelical, and he was just a good example for this guy, and that's how it worked.
He's a Jungian, if anything.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
if that counts as a religion, but in psychological circles,
I don't know. But I mean, this is specifically mentioned Christianity, so I don't know. I don't know if Jungianism, if Jungians could be considered a sect of Christianity or not.
No, Jung was a fundamentalist Christian. He proclaimed to actually know that God exists, but that wasn't his works weren't necessarily tied to any particular religion, but they were very spiritual, as you can discover from
Yeah, see, my idea of fundamentalism doesn't match up with everybody else's necessarily either. I go back to the story of Nicodemus asking what the most important commandment was, and the answer is the fundamentals. But that's for a different discussion, and like this is a discussion of men's rights, not my religion, so I'm not going to go into that. Like, people can ask me about it if they want to know. I felt it goes on. Oh, there we go. The self-help community became his gateway. Ditched his atheism in favor of Christianity. The Discord channel became a portal for Mason into a world of like-minded people. I've felt more comfortable with people who get me rather than people I spoke to before who hated me and my ideas, he said. That makes sense. Mason and his peers said they turn to each other because they don't see their concerns reflected in the mainstream politics and culture. That's, if you have compassion for men, you're never going to see your ideas reflected in mainstream politics and culture until we as a society address gynocentrism and male disposability, and the accountability gap that stems from them, and then you'll see your ideas and concerns reflected more in mainstream, maybe not establishment, but at least mainstream politics and culture.
Yeah, from the left you'll hear, "How dare you have compassion for men?" And from the right you'll hear, "How dare you have compassion for men?"
Yeah. And from the left you'll hear "you hate women," and from the right you'll hear "you hate women." From the left you get told it's your responsibility to keep women comfortable, and from the right you get told it's your responsibility to act as a provider and protector, which is basically to keep women comfortable.
Thing. Exactly.
Right? Used to be fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism. It used to recognize that women also had responsibilities, and family worked when we recognized that both sexes had responsibilities to the family and to each other and to themselves, right? But when we took away women's responsibilities, we destroyed the family, right? We destroyed love. Like, that's the most egregious sin our society has ever committed. Love is the most important thing that humanity has outside of life. Like, without love, you might as well not have life. And we took it away. That is horrible.
Not only did we take it away, we've turned it into a tool to manipulate people and extort things from them, and make them all of their love that they had, make it turn right into a big fucking gigantic pile of hate. It turns it into destruction. When you destroy, it does nothing but beget more destruction.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see. We have going on, Mason and his peers said they turn to each other because they don't see their concerns reflected in mainstream policies and our politics and culture. Tellingly, when President Biden issued an executive order in March 2021 creating a gender policy council, there was not a single reference to boys and men.
If only you knew how bad it really was.
Yeah.
I mean, if only let's
2021. Do you know how far back this shit goes with Biden?
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. You have to understand Biden is the author of the current existing federal family violence law, right? And that law was a correction of previous law. Previous law was genderless. We had, and it's still on the books, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act of 1984. The Family Violence and Prevention and Services Act of 1984 funded shelters, created a 24-hour hotline, stipulated to law enforcement that just because it takes place in the home or within a family doesn't mean that assault becomes legal. Right? That was important. Those are things we needed to have if we are going to have a society that legislates how we deal with violence. Right? It needs to be said that within a home, within a family, it's still not okay to engage in that kind of violence. Right? So we had that. Feminists didn't like it because it didn't say only women were protected and only men were guilty. So they wrote, with Biden, a new law, the Violence Against Women Act. The Violence Against Women Act was designed to treat domestic violence as something that men do to women, not something that people do to each other. Right? And it doesn't address about 80% of different types of instances of domestic violence. It only addresses domestic violence that is strictly male perpetrated against female victims.
It's absolutely targeted.
Right? And when there is female violence against a male victim and he defends itself, it interprets that as strictly male violence against a strictly female victim. Right? So you now have a situation where all of the funding goes to services for women who accuse men of domestic abuse, and all of the recourse is reserved for women who accuse men of domestic abuse, and unfortunately, all of the punishment is reserved for accused men. So when a man is in that situation where he is the one who is abused, or when the abuse that is leveled at him specifically is a false allegation, the entire legal system turns against him. And I've watched that happen in multiple cases. The case that sent me looking for help and got me involved in the men's rights movement was a case of false allegation, malicious prosecution, and vexatious litigation exploiting the Violence Against Women Act and the systems that it funds. So it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare what our legal system has been turned into by this. So Biden wrote that law, and it was signed by Bill Clinton. They put it together specifically for Bill Clinton to sign, because they knew they weren't going to get it from a Republican president. They had the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act from Ronald Reagan. What they did have was cooperation from Republican legislators. And they had those guys, 10 years passed, not a century, 10 lousy years. That's not that long in terms of law and policy.
No, it's not.
And they forgot that they had already passed a law that did all the things that were necessary, and all they really needed to do was continue to fund it. So yeah, Biden, I'm not surprised to see like that executive order, by the way, the Gender Policy Council. There's already a council on the welfare of women and girls. We fought for a long time, years and years. Warren Farrell begged the U.S. government for years and years, decades, to create a council for men and boys as well. And Trump finally did it. Well, he didn't do exactly what Dr. Farrell wanted, but he did.
He at least entertained it.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
did. He did create something that's, I think, now gone. He was going to put Larry Elder on it, which was that was a good choice. Larry Elder is at least recognizing that it's not all men at fault in terms of the breakup of the family, and he does recognize, like, he's talked about this. He's talked about the importance of building up. If you do want men to be responsible for their families and their households, you can't wait until they're adults and then say, you have to do this. You have to build them up throughout their lives from the time they're little boys and give them the tools they need to do that job. You can't just hand somebody a job to do, a responsibility to fulfill after you raised them to be unable to do it. Like, that's bullshit, right? So he at least knows that. And I'm sure, like, he seems to be a very, not intuitive, that's not the right word. Basically he examines things and draws conclusions based on the information in front of him and not preconceived ideas. So he's kind of journalistic in and of itself, himself there, that because I've seen him do that more than once, like on the fly when he's in arguments with people. So that was a good choice, but that's all over now because Biden doesn't think men and boys need help.
You could just have stopped at Biden doesn't think.
Well, that's true. He does what he's told.
Well, he's changed his stance on super predators. You all have seen the clips from back when he was a real human.
Like, I mean,
He's against the wall and frisk him.
He's
throwing the N word here and there. But he hasn't changed his stance on men and boys. He's been steadfast on that.
He's changed the shape of his earlobes, though, somehow.
That's just part of aging.
That's what adrenochrome does. I'm just going to throw it out there.
Guess so. Yeah.
Albert Nader Retro just gave us $2.20 Canadian and says, gotta go. Lauren, don't forget to email me. Good night.
Oh my goodness. Okay, all right, Albert, I will.
Yeah, we're going long, but
we're going long.
Yeah, there's a lot of this article left.
Are we gonna take it into the Enfield?
I want to finish. I really want to finish this, and I don't have to go to work tonight. Are you guys okay with staying on for a little while longer?
Yeah, I'm under daylight savings, so it's an hour earlier than it would be for.
Okay. What about you, Lauren?
Well, I'm still awake and I'm upright, so
okay.
We're
all right, then we'll keep going.
All systems go.
In light of the headwinds facing boys and men, the glaring absence of any conversation about positive masculinity seems like negligence to members of the movement. Men and boys are facing stagnating educational scores, plummeting labor force participation rates, and considerably higher rates of suicide and substance abuse than women. Although I have just heard that women, personally again, and this is outside the article, I have just heard that women are catching up on binge drinking. Why the hell would you do that, ladies? That's just dumb.
Oh, get with the program. Women have been ahead of men for decades over
on
here.
binge drinking. Yeah, I know. I don't know. I had a conversation. I had all kinds of conversations with my kids about drugs and alcohol, and it was basically like, you only get one brain, and unlike other parts of your body, it doesn't recover when you damage it the same way that everything else does. You're lucky if it recovers at all, and usually when it does, it creates detours. You don't rebuild it. So be careful what you do to it. Don't do things that damage it, and learn about things before you use them. And drinking is something that should not be. The goal shouldn't be losing consciousness or losing cognitive ability for the night. So that seems to be the way that they handle it. They don't. They don't do anything without learning about it first, and they don't binge drink. So, let's see. Members of the men's rights movement argue that endemic sexism plagues the court system, with men receiving harsher sentences for identical crimes. Now, this is something that he has also written about in the past. Like, that was included in the other article. And he did mention, I think, Sonia Starr in the other article. Sonia Starr, a law and criminology professor at the University of Chicago, has written extensively about the sentencing gap between men and women in America. Starr has found that men receive 63% longer sentences in federal cases on average than women, with women being twice as likely to avoid incarceration for identical crimes.
Huh?
Oh, wow. That's... Jan Newman says, my last girlfriend died last year from drink. She was 38. I am sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's really young.
Yeah. This is something that we don't... Like, when our society talks to girls about alcohol, like, the only risk that you're taking when you get drunk is that some random guy is going to come along and rape you because you're drunk. Like, that is the lowest risk that you're facing. Most people won't do that, right? You might get dicks drawn on your face if you're a dude, or, other dumb shit drawn on your face if you're a female, right? But one of the things that girls do not get told is our metabolism is different than men's metabolism. We do not have the body mass, and in particular, we do not have the muscle mass. So we don't process alcohol the same way. And if you try to keep up with a man of the same size as you or bigger when you are drinking, you are going to kill yourself, especially if he's a heavy drinker. Alcohol poisoning, the stages of alcohol poisoning go from relaxed to tipsy to drunk to falling down drunk to blind, stinking, falling down drunk to passed out where you're at risk of drowning on your own vomit to seizures and your heart stopping and just never starting back up again. It's not a minor thing. It's why you have to be smart about your drinking. And unfortunately, some people just aren't. And so you end up with that. That's the immediate consequences, right? But if you get to blind, stinking drunk on a regular basis, then you also have deterioration of the liver. Liver disease is a really rough way to go. Cirrhosis of the liver, really rough way to go. I'm not going to describe it, but it's awful. You have heart attacks, you have stroke, like you have brain damage from that. You have kidney damage from that. And I will tell you that kidney failure is rotten. It is a rotten thing to have happen to you. Imagine if you had to be hooked up to a machine every 2 or 3 days and have all of the blood in your body go through that machine to be cleaned out and then put back into your body through a tube every 2 or 3 days, right? And then, on top of that, your diet becomes extremely controlled because you have to watch out how much potassium you're getting and how many phosphates you're getting, how much protein you're consuming. You really have no freedom when you're on dialysis. There are hundreds, thousands of people on dialysis right now that can tell you about it. It sucks. And to do something to yourself to make it happen to you sooner or at all, like, that's foolish. Like, I'm really adamantly against the attitude that people have where they tell women and girls that you should just be able to go out and get drunk and just be carefree and not think about the potential consequences. You know what? Think about the potential consequences. Because it sucks when you're old. You beat the hell out of your body when you're young. It's going to beat the hell out of you when you get old.
Yeah. One day you're not young anymore, and it happens before you know it.
Yeah.
Also, there's situational problems beside the chemical problems, and you're much more likely to get into a fight when you're drunk. And this, again, isn't something that just affects men. A lot of us have seen the fights that women get into outside clubs at midnight when they're drunk.
Yeah.
And don't think, as a woman fighting a woman, you're any less likely to get your head beaten into the concrete. We've all seen that too.
Oh yeah.
It's fucking treacherous, and no one's gonna step in to stop you if they have any sense. Girls fight dirty, like they don't have rules like men do. I mean, you're no safer as a man, but yeah, women fight just as dirty as men do, and yeah, they will smash your head into the nearest solid object. So yeah, don't do it.
A woman in a fight will stick her finger in your mouth and try to use her fingernail to tear out your whole cheek.
Yeah. Yes.
I've never done that. I did pull all the jewelry out of one chick's face once. That was horrifying. It wouldn't have been so easy if she hadn't had it all chained together. Like, I think she thought that her eyebrow ring was going to escape, so she chained it to the other two pieces. But yeah, it's just when we fight dirty. I have fought dirty. When you're in a situation where you think you're not gonna survive the fight if you don't fight dirty, you fight dirty. And if you're dealing with other women, especially if there's more than one of them, you fight dirty. So yeah, everything. It's one of the reasons why I mentioned at one point I was talking to somebody about there's changes in standards and letting women get longer hair and stuff in the military and everything. I'm like, they're letting them grow a handle for somebody to grab onto in a fight. 'Cause I've done that. You get somebody by the ponytail, you can just manipulate their whole body. Then there's nothing they can do about it unless they can get your hand off their ponytail. The same thing with the bangs when girls used to have those poofy bangs.
Listen, I'm generally not a violent person. I try to live my life by the non-aggression principle. But there's this one bitch, I'm waiting for her to have an excuse to put her fucking hands on me, and I'm going to bury her. I know.
I see it now as an adult. Like my response if somebody wants to get into a fight is really simple. I do not have to do that with you. Like, if you make me do that, I am going to press charges.
Yeah.
All right. If you make me, it's like I said in my video on the topic, violence is labor. You are doing work. You are putting forth your bodily effort. You are putting forth emotional effort. It's genuine emotional labor because you have to remember for the rest of your life that you did it. Like, if I close my eyes,
I'm good with that.
There's one chick in the world out there that I can still to this day, 30 plus years later, hear her nose break, and I will feel bad about it every time that sound replays in my head. For the rest of my life, when I'm 80, if I remember that, I will feel bad about it. It was justified, but it doesn't feel any better afterwards.
See, I can say what I'm saying because I've not been put in that situation, right? Like, if I really did the kind of physical damage that I would actually do to this person, should I be put in that situation? On hindsight, yes, I would feel really bad about it. I would feel very, very, very good and vindicated in the moment, but that's the thing that people they don't stop to take that minute to realize that moment of satisfaction can cost you a lifetime of pain.
Yeah.
And that person, no matter how badly they have done you wrong, it still hurts later. But most of the time, it's just best to just walk away and, be the bigger person. And it's really hard to do. I am finding myself challenged in this area with this one person, and
Yeah.
I'm really trying to. But seriously, like, I'm really trying to work out why it is that I have such a problem with this one person, because I don't normally address people in this way. You know what I mean? It's not it this is abnormal for me. So I really want to understand why I have such a problem with her. And I think I understand what's happening here. And it's because there was a situation at work, and she's just really completely unaccountable.
That's probably it right there. You're used to accountability, and you have a recognition of personal agency, and when you deal with somebody who completely fails to have that or understand it, it becomes, after you develop a level of awareness where you can name it and talk about it, then run into somebody who doesn't understand it or ignores it and flaunts ignoring it. That person will be the most annoying person you have ever met in your life. Even if, like, 10, 15 years ago, when you didn't have language in your lexicon of things that you're used to talking about, that would you regularly use to describe that kind of thing. Like, maybe that person would be mildly annoying. You'd be like, God, what a ditz, or what a dumb shit, Now it's like, you do have this sense of, God, I just want to strangle this person, but you don't really, just like with me, I've said, and when I say it was justified, I mean it was self-defense against an immediate threat that was very, very threatening, and so that was a situation where it was too late to get out of the fight. It was basically managing the threat level as best I could, and that was how I did it, and it was awful. And it was what I was used to growing up. Like, that was not the first big fight I was in, the big physical fist fight between me and more than one other girl. I think that was the last one. The very last one. And, I mean, I was 17 at that point, so I didn't have a whole nother year of not being old enough to go to jail for getting into fights, right? And once you turn 18, you become more careful about that if you live in an area where you can be held accountable for it. And I did. The local system would have hesitated no more to send me to jail for getting into a fight than my brother. So that I think that's the way it should be. I think that's what helped me to avoid assholes more. Was like, well, if you don't avoid assholes and you get into a fight with one of them, you both might go to jail. Right? That's, reality. You want to avoid jail so you don't put yourself in that situation. Women don't all learn that. But in most places, like, if that happened here, I would have, where I am now, I don't think I'd have the same benefit of accountability to help me. If I grew up in the city here, I think I would have had too many passes. I don't know if I'd have learned it another way, but I wouldn't have had the accountability from the state. Because I've noticed in this area, at least, to a degree, women are more, they respond to women differently. Instead of charging an assailant with assault, they're more likely to spread out lower charges among all of the women involved. And I experienced that personally as the victim of an assault in 2019. Instead of charging my assailant with assault, they charged the cop charged both of us with disorderly conduct, and I had to go to court to prove that I was not engaging in disorderly conduct, and then get that expunged so I wouldn't have a record of having been charged with it. And, like, the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The judge actually looked at me like she was apologizing for the whole system when she ruled that my record would be expunged. But I at 48 years old was sitting there thinking, geez, she's talking about me having a record. Like, I've spent from the time I was 18 years old until 48 years old, practicing nonviolence, and that happens.
Yeah.
Wow. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's from the perspective of a woman. If that same girl had attacked my brother, and he had reacted in exactly the same way that I did, by letting her hit him until it reached a point where, okay, well, this is going to be too dangerous to allow to continue, I got to get away, and then stopping it by saying, I'm going to call the cops, and then followed through and called the cops, they would have charged him with assault. They would have arrested him, because the cops' reasoning was, since I tried to get away from her, it was equally a fight on both sides. I tried to loosen her grip on me and move away from her, and that was assault. That was an equal amount of assault. I'm still mad about that. Like, I probably will be mad about that for a long time, because that's unfair, but that's like minor unfairness compared to like the men that I have known that have been abused and then have been arrested, for I know a guy that was arrested, charged, and convicted of assault for stopping a woman on her second attempt at stabbing him in the throat. Like, she was going for the jugular, literally going for the jugular. And the judge said his attempt to stop her was too rough.
No, but see, Hannah, you just have to understand that guy, he really just should have, he should have just accepted the fact that he's a man and that there's differences, and, the system's just not going to treat him fairly. I mean, I don't know what is he supposed to do about this, right?
As a man,
he's not supposed to stand up for his own rights.
As a man, his jugular is bigger and stronger than her knife.
Seriously, I mean, what was it thinking doing there? I mean, it was just like in the way. It just happened to puncture itself on that knife. Oh, come on.
He probably would have been convicted of getting her clothes dirty if he bled on her. Right?
Yes! And she would have gotten the fucking... They would have paid her for the fucking dry cleaning bill.
Right.
That's in jest, but honestly, it doesn't really seem out of the realm of reality when we talk about these situations, because it's just so mind-blowing how in your face these situations are, right? The realities of them are, and women can she's got a vagina. And so I've been watching these Zoom court meetings, right? This is gold, internet gold, people. Look them up, because holy shit, it's a new world. So court cases are being held on these Zoom meetings because of COVID, right? And it's really interesting because there's all these technical difficulties.
Yeah.
And so, it would be one thing if there was like, if the judge had the ability to mute people, but they don't, right? So these people who are in court for whatever charges, right? They can just, now in a court setting, your attorney would be there and he would tell you to shut the fuck up, right?
Right.
That can't happen on these calls.
Oh, yeah.
So these people just go and they just, but you'll see the women. What they do is they resort to their tears. Oh my God, I didn't know. There was this one woman, I guess she gotten stopped for a DUI and she was supposed to be tested, and she drank again and blew a .08. was past the limit, right? Her excuses was, "Oh, my son gave me the drink. I didn't know what was in it."
Oh, geez, she
And
tried
blah,
to
blah,
blame her son. That's pretty bad.
Yes. And she's just, wham. Nope. Go to jail. Go the fuck to jail. You're going to jail. Oh, I just started a new job. Wham. And out comes more tears. It's
Yeah.
but that's what they use to get over. And there are
Well, there's
so
a
many
lot of
judges.
things. Like Sonia Starr, what she found, that there's a combination of, women being able to use emotional appeal, but there's also things like if a convicted perp is a parent, or if a charged individual, a charged suspect, is a parent, and they let that be known either to the prosecutor or the court. A prosecutor is more likely to go hard after a male parent, a father, but they're more likely to offer a deal to a mother, right?
Yeah.
And a judge is more likely to hand a parent a lighter sentence if they're a mother, in light of their kid's need for them to be at home. But a father is a bad example and needs to go to jail longer, or needs a heavier sentence. And this is consistent. It's a consistent issue. And then the other thing is, they use threats of heavier sentencing to get men to plead guilty when they're not guilty more often than they do that to women. There's a bunch of things like that. Public opinion on a case was another one. And I actually wrote about Starr's report in 2013 here, and I think we talked about this in the last show. But for the listeners, let me make sure I've got the title right. It's the article that I wrote, because he didn't actually. He linked to her work, okay, because he didn't give the name of it, but the report that I wrote about is called "Explaining the Gender Gap in." Oh wait, that one is Donner's. Where's Starr's? There we go. I have my article is called "Gender Disparity in Criminal Court." It is in the Misandric Culture subtitle, in A Voice for Men. The Starr report is estimating gender disparities in federal criminal cases. It is a University of Michigan Law and Economics research paper, so that should help you find that online. And then included in my article was a discussion of Jill K. Donner wrote also a report explaining the gender gap in sentencing outcomes and investigation of differential treatment in U.S. federal courts. So hers was specific to the federal courts. But I looked at both of those and a bunch of other factors as well. And this is consistent across different types of criminal charges, but things like drug charges, for instance. Women will claim that the guy was the mastermind if they're involved in a crime in conjunction with a guy. They'll claim that he was the mastermind. It was his crime. She was just along for the ride, or he made her do it, or she was under his thrall. He got her addicted to drugs, and that's why she had bad judgment. Blah, 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 blah. Never
Hell,
any.
They'll do it. They'll do it to other women.
Yeah, they'll do it to other women. But it's easier to do it to a man.
Absolutely.
And, there's also a public relations aspect. People have more sympathy for women, and so judges can be more manipulated. So, for instance, if the victim of a crime is a woman and the perpetrator is a man, prosecutors and judges will be aware that their reputations kind of ride on throwing the book at that guy. But if the perpetrator is female That's not so much the case. And in fact, if the perpetrator is a locally popular female, it's quite possible that their reputations ride on being lenient with this woman, giving her another chance, recognizing the mitigating factors in the crime and taking them into consideration and so on. So, like, there's a lot that, women get the compassion and men get the book thrown at them. And that's a huge thing that needs to change. And we've got research going back decades that shows that in various ways. And that also demonstrates that throwing the book at people doesn't stop crime. They don't learn from that. They learn from rehabilitative practices, not punishment. But let's see, going on. Domestically, there is virtually no serious American politician who has spoken openly about this issue. Warren Farrell, whom many of the interviewees consider the founding father of the movement, there's a reason for that. In terms of the modern men's rights movement, he is the founding father.
Because no one can remember any of the grandfathers, let alone great-grandfathers.
Right? Yeah, we would have to call Ernest Belfort Bax a founding father of the men's rights movement in the 20th century, because that's back from the earlier time period. If you look up Ernest Belfort Bax on A Voice for Men, you'll see there's a whole series of his writings. He and I probably would not have agreed on many things in terms of economics and stuff like that, but he's spot on in terms of the way the law treats men in relation to women, and I'm sure that we could have found common ground working on that. But yeah, he found that Andrew Yang was the only Democratic presidential contender in Iowa in 2019 willing to discuss the issue. According to members of the movement, there are two central underlying reasons for their lack of visibilities. The increasingly popular belief among young feminists that society is a zero-sum game between the sexes, and the media's depiction of men's rights activists as angry white men, a phrase popularized by one of academia's leading masculinity experts, Michael Kimmel.
Sorry, I threw up in my mouth just now.
Yeah. Michael Kimmel's entire career is repeating things that were said by that were come up with, I should say, by a trans woman in the throes of pre-transitioning gender dysphoria about masculinity. This is not to say that they are invalid because a trans woman said them, but that they might not apply to the greater population of men because they were said by someone who was predisposed to view all masculinity as a cage in which she was trapped. And when you are looking at all masculinity through that filter, I don't think you're necessarily going to be intellectually honest about it. At least not in terms of other people's potential experiences with it. But yeah. When you focus on only one sex winning, both sexes lose, Farrell told the National Review. We have to reposition the gender issue to recognize that we're all in this together, and then we have to remember that. That's the hardest thing to get people to do.
The ironic thing is that that's what feminists say, and they say when you raise women up, you raise everyone up. When you give women more rights, you give everyone more rights, and then it really does become a zero-sum game when it comes to the theory, or at least the hypothesis behind all of this. But
I would say the difference.
Then you have to figure out what feminists are saying and what the opposition to feminists are saying.
Yeah.
You're about to describe that, so please do.
Yeah, I would say the difference on that is when men's rights activists talk about that, we stop at we're all in this together, and we have to remember that. And when we go on to talk about the issues themselves, we talk about taking gender out of the law to keep things even and to promote equal recognition of human rights, equal respect for human rights. So if bodily autonomy, for instance, is a human right, and it is a violation of your human right to force sex on you against your will, it shouldn't matter whether you're male or female, and it shouldn't matter whether the person doing it is male or female. It's bodily autonomy as a human right. All human beings should have the protection of the law that says if somebody violates your human right to bodily autonomy, to decide who you will and will not have sex with, that person is in violation of that law and will face penalty. And if there are resources to help you recover from the trauma of experiencing that violation, you shouldn't be kept out or cut out of those resources based on your sex or based on the sex of your perpetrator. Like, that's it, right? When feminists start making their arguments, they start arguing that women need special treatment over and above human rights. So there should be special rights just for women. And they never really follow through and explain exactly how that elevates men. So we hear about, well, when you elevate women, you elevate everyone. And that's why women need the right to this money or that money. Women need their own special recovery funds. Women need their own special laws to protect just women against sexual assault and abuse and so on. And that's not about equality, right? That is about creating a two-tiered legal system, a second class and a primary class. And it doesn't elevate anybody. It cripples women in ways that feminists don't understand, or if they do, they're really malicious for attempting. And it cripples men in ways that most people can't even see. And then, of course, it also immediately harms men as well.
And that's why you have to listen to the likes of Jess Phillips, who will just not get the memo regarding the gaslight. And they will just say, when it comes to pushing some people forward, it also means pushing some people back.
Yep. And there's no limit to how much she wants to push men back. And like, she's the one really who has held the UK back from recognizing that it isn't equal treatment if perpetrators of the most intimate of sexual assault that could cause reproduction, that you label them rapist if they're male but not female. So you're not treating the perpetrators equally. That she stopped that from going through multiple times, right? There's several petitions, and her logic is that it's worse to spend 9 months pregnant than 18 years being forced to pay child support. In my opinion, I don't care if you think it's worse. The action, the intent behind the action, is the reason that we label the person, right? You label a person based on what they did, not based on what the other person they did it to feels and experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
The mens rea, I think it's mens rea or mens rea. Mens rea of the situation is completely ignored, right? When you start, well, if you don't use a penis, it's not rape. Yeah, it still is. Like, I don't care what you used. The intent is the same.
The fact that it's called mens rea, for those who don't know, is just a coincidence. I believe Greek or Latin for mind. And that's why the magazine Mensa had to call itself Mensa rather than Men's. They wanted to call it Men's, but they were worried that might make it sound like a gay magazine.
Oh gosh, that's funny. Nerds are always worried about that kind of stuff.
You can see why.
We always are worried that people are going to mistake one thing we say for meaning something else because they don't understand us.
Yeah, it's fair enough in that case, because if you called your magazine Men's, you can see why people would think it was about men.
Hey, well, that's true. So going on, many of the activists the National Review spoke to want to pursue a different vision of gender equality, one championed by chat member Tim Goldrich, a self-described gender equalist who writes books and gives lectures making the case that society needs to recognize the unique struggles of men and women rather than trying to elevate one gender's grievances above the others. In Goldrich's view, the conversation around gender politics has become stuck and requires an alternative to help people reconceptualize gender relations by calling a draw in the competition for victimhood status and refocusing efforts on true equality. But when members of the movement seek to present those ideas to the public, they're often met with mockery and derision. Thomas Carney, a former small-time Hollywood actor better known in men's rights circles by his handle BlueOrange22, hello, Blue Orange.
Hello.
Found that out firsthand when he called into the Majority Report with Sam Cedar last year. During a show, a feminist guest rolled her eyes and jeered at Carney as he described how he often hears from scared teenage boys looking for guidance. Yeah, feminists really not only don't care about boys' feelings, but some actually revel in their fear. They're glad that boys are scared. They think that's a victory.
But they totally care about men and their rights.
And feminism is totally not about hating men and boys.
No, never. Not once, ever.
Yeah. One of Goldrich's intellectual partners advocating gender equalism is David Shackleton. Where the hell did that come from? Don't even know why I was thinking the name Dick.
David Shackleton has a CK, so
that's probably
it became an amalgamation.
Yeah, I read it wrong, but I knew it was wrong. Anyway, David Shackleton became involved with the men's rights movement after the common experience of divorce, which left him reeling and searching for answers. I just saw for the first time that the whole story in society about men and women was about male violence and female victimization. That didn't ring true for me, Shackleton said in a phone interview. Shackleton reserves some blame for the men's rights movement itself for often behaving in a way that plays into the angry white man perception. I think it's not easy to fully empathize with men. Few do, Shackleton said. It goes against cultural grain. And that is true. Like, most people will say it goes against your people's nature. I don't believe that, but it does go against cultural grain.
Yeah.
But I believe we must shift some empathy toward men. If men tend to express themselves in an unhealthy way, it's at least in part because men aren't granted any healthy avenues for speaking and being heard. Farrell, an activist who sought meetings with the 2020 Democratic presidential contenders, has publicly called on the White House to create a designated council for boys and men, but has had little access so far. He remains hopeful, however, that once the culture moves on from its zero-sum approach to gender relations and policies start to catch up, real solutions to the problems facing men will be found. And again, I'm just going to point out, the only candidate who ever even considered the idea was not a career politician.
Right.
And I don't think that Trump is perfect in any way, shape, or form. I'm still, I still blame him for a lot of the shit that happened during the pandemic because, he did take a big government approach after all of that small government populist talk, and that bugs the hell out of me. Not that anybody else would have done better, because everybody else on the field, all of the other players in the arena of politics are big government people, for the most part. That So,
But you
but
take
we do
what
have,
you take what you can get. Just like
yeah,
I don't trust Tucker, but I'll take what I can get.
yeah,
He's leagues ahead of everyone on Fox. Never mind everyone else on every other network.
yeah,
Like
and he's
you don't
probably,
need you don't need to trust any of these people, but there are the lesser of 1,000 evils.
yeah.
They include Trump and Tucker.
Yep, and I think Tucker Carlson, I think he's coming from a perspective, and his perspective colors his current view of everything, right? And so that original perspective change makes a difference. But he's similar to this writer in that if you give him a set of information that can be validated and confirmed, these things are true, and you show them to him, he'll evaluate his current outlook on the topic to include those things. He'll evaluate it, reevaluate it based on that new information, and hone his perspective. And a lot of people don't do that. So, like, when it comes to this article, I would have given the original article, like if you were grading the article on a scale of A to F, like in the U.S., or 1 to 10 or something, where or 0 to 10, where 0 is terrible and 10 is perfect. And in the previous article, I would have graded that as 0 because it was just absolutely abysmal in terms of how it was written.
Yeah.
Where I would say this one, I would actually go as high as a 7. There's still some needs there for new information, but I think sandwiched in around that was a whole bunch of learning, and you cannot expect somebody to go from 0 to 10 in one article. So I would love to see this guy talk to Namakates and learn about incels and actually understand better.
Hey,
I would love to see
come
this
to
guy
HBR.
talk to Brian and do like a in particular a fireside chat, because I think the back and forth would be great. Like, I'd love to see him come on here and talk to us, and I would love to see him talk to the guys at A Voice for Men, the guys at the National Coalition for Men. I'd love to see him talk to some actual MGTOW and learn their reasons for their decisions in regard to what they're doing in their lives and what they're not doing in their lives. Because I think he has the capacity, I think he has the tendency to adjust his conclusions when new information comes along based on how that new information fits in with the information he already has, or eliminates beliefs that he already had. Like, does it confront the belief, or does it confirm the belief? And I would love to see more people do that in their journalism, real journalism.
And I'd love it if Konstantin Kissin could come and talk to us, but I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, that's true. Like, that's a harder ask right there. But I did find some contact information and gave it to Brian, so that's a start. We'll see what happens. Because I think that meeting a journalist that can change his mind, given new information, is priceless. Like, there's no price you can put on that. That's very important. And
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm still here. I just don't know, given what is written here, that this guy actually changed his mind. I'm not hearing his opinion on these things. I'm just hearing him give quotes and state facts. So
see, that tells me that he changed his mind because he didn't give opinions like he did before. Everything he wrote before was opinion.
Yeah.
And clearly, if he really believed today that other stuff, he would not have written this article. But I'm talking about it from the perspective of a person who's worked in newspaper.
And
as a journalist.
if this was the final edit, I mean, what's this? The National Review. I don't know much about the National Review, but if they're anything like most journalistic outlets, then they must have edited him down to whatever most suits their agenda. And if their agenda is anything like the average, smear merchant rag, if that was what they could edit it down to, then, I mean, what else did he say?
Yeah,
it's an interesting question. You don't know what the rough draft is going to be like,
right?
But yeah. So all in all, like I said, I would give it a 7. You can't expect somebody to go from 0 to 10 in one jump. But I'm not disappointed. This actually turned out to be pretty decent, especially the lack of editorializing. Like that's, like I said, real journalists don't in reporting on a subject, they don't editorialize. They write the facts and they let you make your mind up. So even though I have criticisms in regard to the take on incels and the take on MGTOW and the idea that appearing angry makes you bad, overall, I'm grateful that Ari Blaff listened to men's rights activists and wrote a new article. Because I wish it hadn't been behind a paywall, but it's a different publication and that might be their normal. So, who knows? But in the meantime, we are at almost 11 o'clock at night. I don't know if I'm going to have anybody in the chat for the patron show. But I am going to call it for the night because this was a long sausage.
But we got through it.
But
well
we
done,
did.
Everyone.
We made it one show. We probably will not do this again for a while in terms of going through an entire article in one show. If I get to 9:30 and we're only halfway through the next thing that I picked to read for next week, we're going to do 2 shows on it. So, because like,
what'd you get?
I haven't settled on it yet, but I think I did post something in our chat about advertising. This was quite a the ad industry has the tools and skills to fight rising misogyny. Sounds Orwellian, doesn't it? Yeah. So we might be looking at that. It's a professional thing, not a like it's not some feminist writing about we want you to do this, we want you to do that. It's a how-to. So but that's next week. And I expect that to take a couple of weeks to go through because we're going to have some things to respond to. But if it doesn't, I'll come up with something else for the following week. But in the meantime, thanks you guys for sticking out the long sausage. Both of you really made this a very interesting conversation. And thanks to our listeners for sticking out the long sausage with us. Thanks to everyone who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay?
That
they
was a
are
strange
literal
comment.
machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.